Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's session. And for this training, my name is Harrison. I'm the program manager at Training Center in Communication, TCC Africa, based at the University of Nairobi. Today, we are privileged to have the Dean, Faculty of Science and Technology, University of Nairobi, together with the Deputy Assistant Dean, Professor Sheila. And pretty much I'll welcome Professor Sheila to introduce the Dean that will give us a snippet of what we are going to, and maybe give a direction for university students. And in this team, there's quite a number of University of Nairobi students and faculty, staff members as well, and also researchers across Africa. So today pretty much is covering science communication, looking at what you've published. How can you create an impact? How can you communicate beyond the scope of your peers? So to take us through today is Dr. Ann Mucheke. But before Dr. Ann Mucheke comes in, I'd like to bring in Professor Sheila Okoth. Over to you, Professor Sheila. Unmute.
Yeah, thank you very much, Harrison and the TCC community. Sorry, I'm talking from the laboratory, so my background will be that of laboratory. So we thank you very much for the training and for the opportunity, and we thank you for the works that you are doing for the country as a whole, for Africa, the region as a whole, and also for the university community. This far, we have seen the works that you have done, and we are proud of TCC as an agent of change. Your work speaks louder than any other thing, and we are proud to have you here and also just to receive from you. And we are also grateful for the opportunity that you keep giving our students and staff for each time when you have your trainings. So without much ado, I will take the opportunity to introduce our Dean, who is the head of the Faculty of Science and Technology, Professor Leonida Kerubo. I give you the floor to speak. Thank you very much, Professor, for having time also to come and grace and open this training. Over to you, Professor Leonida Kerubo.
Thank you very much, Associate Dean. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you very much. So thank you very much, Associate Dean, and I also want to acknowledge the rest of the members, especially the organizing committee. It's my great pleasure to welcome all of you to the most beautiful faculty of that is the Faculty of Science and Technology of the University of Nairobi, where TCC is strategically hosted. So let me also welcome you to this two-day workshop on scientific communication. I didn't know that we also have staff and students from elsewhere. I thought they were just our staff and students from the University of Nairobi, but I want to also warmly welcome all the other staff from and students from other universities. You are welcome. So of course, the workshop theme, you've gone through the program, is on producing communication pieces from already published work, and mostly policy briefs. And of course, those are the areas where like our staff and students have challenges. Yeah, you get that we publish work publications, but we don't know how to communicate to the policy makers. So this is very important, and it's one of our goals as a faculty and also as the University of Nairobi, for us to know how to write policy briefs. So I really want to thank TCC for initiating this particular dialogue with our faculty and also other staff and students from elsewhere. I'd like to extend my gratitude to the organizing committee, which is again consisting of TCC and also working very closely with the Associate Dean of the Faculty of Science and Technology, who has just introduced me, Professor Sheila Okot. You've done an exceptional work in coordinating these activities that has led to this very important workshop. So thank you very much. Additionally, I would like to also thank all the staff and the students of the Faculty of Science and Technology, and also from these other universities who have also applied or responded to the call and have actually attended this particular workshop. Of course, they are going to really benefit from it. Just to briefly say about the TCC, we have had a very long a collaboration with TCC that is spanned very many years. And though with the varying levels of activities, but I'm really delighted that we are starting this year on a very positive note with this early initiative. Because initially, like some years, I don't think we've had any activities, but I am very happy with this year that we are starting very well. So following this workshop, we'll also discuss on how the faculty and even other stakeholders. And of course, when we are talking about faculty, we also work very closely with other universities across Africa. We want to know how we can leverage on the expertise in scientific communication to benefit the staff, students, and stakeholders. And even in the broader UON, University of Nairobi, and other universities across Africa, as outlined in our MOU. We have an MOU with TCC, and that's why we are we actually interact very cordially. The relationship is very good. So I really want to thank you. Additionally, we have an option of reviewing the existing MOU because I think it was done long time to address also emerging needs such as particularly in the fields such as AI, climate change and adaptation, data science, just to name a few. And some of the topics which we would like to really you to help us with is how to publish. Our students and also staff can publish their scientific findings in credible and also impactful journals, amongst other activities that we can do this year. So in closing, ladies and gentlemen, may I take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you once again for attending this important workshop and working with us to chart the way forward in producing communication pieces from already published work. I wish you all successful engagements and deliberations during the 2 days of 2 days workshop. I'm also going to attend, but not consistently throughout the 2 days. I'm also going to try and be there to see, because I also need to get those skills of translating my research findings into policy or short communications to policymakers. So my name is Professor Leonida Kerubo. I am a chemist, a natural product chemist from the Department of Chemistry, of course, and also the Dean of the Faculty of Science and Technology. So welcome, and let me hand over to Harrison. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof, for that powerful introduction, because it's very important for the team and the participants to know where we are based, because we are based under the Faculty of Science and Technology within the University of Nairobi. So before I bring in the trainer, these are quite hands-on training. It is interactive and experience-based sharing, because that is what so far we are advocating. That is why we bring in participants across Africa to share experience, because it's pretty much not lecturing. This is a hands-on training and engagement and experience sharing. So key to that. So in the chat, as I introduce the trainer, is you can go ahead and share which field you are. As a professor, the dean has shared which field she is in. So everyone else, you can share the fields you are in. It will also help the trainer to see how to engage as she trains. And another thing, we'll be breaking in group sessions and all that, because pretty much it's presentation, assignments, and all that. So I'd like to bring in Ann, who will introduce herself and her experience and her expertise as well. So welcome, Ann. Thank you.
Okay, I hope I'm audible. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, from very cold Nairobi. We have been experiencing some interesting climate change adaptations in the last couple of days. Thank you, Harrison. Thank you very much, Professor Leonida, for the warm welcome and introduction also to this session. Thank you, Dr. Otieno, as well, for welcoming us. And as Mr. Weda says, we have a good partnership and relationship with the University of Nairobi in running this module, and we are very excited this morning to be able to come back again. I think the last time we did it, we were actually present at the university, but we are doing it online. And just as well, as Harrison has said, my name is Ann Mucheke. I partner with the TCC in, in facilitating this module, which is a science communication and communicating to non-scientists, which we are going to be running through for the next 2 days. Personally, I have a background in communications and media, but I've also worked for a humanitarian organization. We have trained media and humanitarian reporting. We've also looked at different audiences in terms of how how to communicate with them. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on this morning. I think we've looked, and I can see that people are beginning to share where they work and what they do. So we have a huge, we have differences across the divide in terms of who is in this room. And I'm hoping that, as Harrison has said, it's going to be as interactive as possible. We're going to share, we are going to use the chat. We're also going to see how we can, tomorrow especially, which is more of a hands-on experience, to see how we are going to work together in terms of groups and see how we can have shared experiences. I will encourage you to raise up your hands in case you have something to say in the course of the presentation. My colleague Nicole, who is supporting us, even if I'm not able to see in case there's feedback or comments from you, she'll be able to see that, and she'll be able to prompt me in terms of what we need to do. So once again, feel welcome. Our program today is divided sort of like in 2 main sessions. We'll take a break at about 11 o'clock. That's in another 1 hour and 10 minutes. But I'm sorry, in another 1 hour and about 40 minutes. But I'm hoping that we will have engaged enough before we go for the break to be able to share, to be able to do what we can. So just let me see 1 minute whether I can put up my presentation. Just a minute.
As Ann is trying to fix the presentation. I can see quite a number of responses from within the University of Nairobi, different university as far as Ghana. I can see that public health. There's quite a number of public hospitality and tourism. That's good response so far. So good, good, good. Let them come to see, to help us know, yeah, University of the Free State in South Africa. That's good. We please share also as well which field you are in. I can see you just wrote which university you're coming from. Good. I can see Patrick, Industrial Chemistry, University of Nairobi. Good. Aga Khan University, Biomedical Services. Good. University of Rwanda, Food Science and Technology. So we have diverse community here from different parts of Africa. So this is a good platform for sharing knowledge, experience as well. Turning, you're going to see, because we expect output out of this training, 2-day training, based on beyond the policy briefs. There's quite a number of communication pieces that you're going to be taken through on how to produce them. Yes, policy brief is very key. How can, at the end of the day, how does your research output impact policy? And how will you write it well to be adopted within the governance or political ecosystem or policy ecosystem as well? So this is very key. Yeah, so, and you can see there's a quite diverse team here. You will see quite a big number coming from Faculty of Science and Technology of University of Nairobi. So this is good. But also across Africa, West, East, and even Southern Africa as well, the different universities. Can see KwaZulu-Natal, quite a bit. So thank you. I think I can stop it from there as you proceed. Ann, over to you. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Nicole is going to, support. We are just waiting for the presentation to come up. But as Harrison has said, very interesting stuff that is coming out. I mean, in terms of what you do, you know, science is one of those topics where when you think about it, it's as complex as it can get. And as we are, I mean, as you're looking at what people are studying, because it's such a wide or diverse, what are diverse topics. So when you think about it, science is wide. It's just like different facets of communication. So we are just going to look at, we're just going to begin by asking ourselves, what really is science discussion? What is science communication? What would your answers be? I'm going to put a link on the chat that we can, we can all use to answer. So if you look at that on the chat, I'm just going to put a link. If you look at the link and just enter the responses. Just 1 minute, sorry. As always, sometimes there are teething problems on this. So just give me a minute. Yeah, so just go to that link and then answer the question, answer the question on that link that there is. Okay, it's there. just copy on that link and maybe put in 1 or 2 answers. We're looking at what is science communication. And if you look at last year, as you answer the question, if you look at last year, 2024, what are the discoveries that were made in science? I'm just waiting to see what responses we'll get on that WooClap. It's a tool that is helping us. So if you look at the picture, if you look at, I mean, there's all these types of people looking at this, I mean, looking at this young lady. So we're trying to see, what do you understand by science communication? And in 2024, we had scientists making discoveries in biology, in space, in health. And some of these include, and I'm just reading or borrowing from a document I got online, the heaviest antimatter nucleus. Scientists at the relativistic heavy ion collider discovered the heaviest antimatter nucleus ever detected. It's made up of antiproton, 2 antineutrons, and 1 antithyperon. I'm not even sure what is it called? I'm pronouncing them right. Reconstruction of ancient ancestor. Scientists reconstructed the ancient ancestor of all modern life. We have a neural circuit regulating the immune system. Scientists discovered a neural circuit that regulates the immune system. We have protein science, artificial intelligence, transformed protein science, fruit fly brain map. Researchers published the first ever full map of an adult fruit fly's brain. If you look at the size of a fruit fly and they're able to dissect that, you can tell that you're really in wonderful spaces. Then we have a blood test for Alzheimer's disease. AI solving math problems. AI solved 83% of all historical international mathematical Olympiad geometry problems from the past 25 years. I think Professor Leonida has alluded to the importance of also getting into training in terms of that. AI climate change, there are those new developments, of course, done by scientists and also IT geniuses like yourself. So you can see that as we move, we are progressing. Robotic sensor reading Braille. Scientists at the University of Cambridge unveiled a robotic sensor that can read Braille at 315 words per minute. And then new patterns in fingerprints. Scientists analyzed 60,000 prints and found new patterns in ridge orientations and curvatures. These are some of what was available online in terms of what we could see. So I can see from your response that you've given in terms of what is effective communication. So the word map it's bringing for me is listeners, non-technical communication, acknowledgement, understood, is there a message clearly, let us exchange, receiving, understandable, process, easily exchanging, interaction, transmitting, cues, we're looking at satisfaction, conveying. So thank you very much for everybody who has been able to respond to that question. And all of this is communication. The next slide, please. All of this is what we are looking at in terms of communication. So we also look at what are the advantages of effective communication. Why do we think we need to communicate effectively? Now think about this. If you're I always say you think about the nearest person to you. So if you are to speak to, for those of you who have spouses at home, or if you speak to your colleague who does not work, maybe the receptionist at the place where you work, if you are to tell her about this about this discovery of neural circuit regulating the immune system, about how scientists discovered a neural circuit that regulates the immune system. Think about it and let me know how you would be able to speak this in a language that they understand or appreciate, even if they are in a profession that is not where you are. So think about it for a minute and think about it and say, would I be able to effectively communicate what there is if I was to say that? Or this very complex one, heaviest antimatter nucleus, the relativistic heavy ion collider discovered the heaviest antimatter nucleus ever detected. To be honest, I don't understand what I am reading. So our whole point today is to say, how do we decode this heavy language, this technical language, this language that includes pictures and signs and wonders in terms of, and put them in audiences that matter. As you've spoken about policymakers, how do we tell lawmakers about what we are, about our discoveries, and make sure that they, that we are not only telling them, but ensuring that they are interested and that they take advantage, they matter. Next slide, please. So science communication, we basically say, refers to the transmission of ideas, methods, and knowledge to non-experts in an accessible and helpful way. We've given the example of, for example, it could be your spouse, it could be somebody you work with who is not in the lab with you, who's not writing papers, who's not in the field collecting data, and you're able to tell them what you do. For those of you who go out with drivers, you're driving with your colleagues and they're the ones who take you from one point to another. If you're in the field doing data collection, if you're going for meetings, presenting conferences, if you work for I always tell people that in a work setting or an environment, it's important that everybody from the institution is able to speak about the institution. So a driver working for the University of Nairobi attached to the Institute of Science or Department of Faculty of Science, do they know what goes on in there? So that if they're ever stopped and you're with the police in the field, are they able to explain what my boss is doing, what they are doing? Disseminate that information so that it also matters to them what they are doing. When you go out to pitch, for example, for geologists, and you're out there looking for fossils, and you're, and you're looking for things that you can bring back into the labs, can they support you in what you're doing, or you leave them in the car sitting for 3-4 hours with your fellow researchers and you're working on that? So this is how we want to be able to communicate what we do to all of these people, the non-experts, in an accessible and helpful way. We also, science communication also prioritizes explaining complex scientific ideas to non-expert audiences, avoiding jargon and using accessible language. We break it down through various channels like news articles, documentaries, social media posts, public lectures, museum exhibits, podcasts, and even educational materials. So in a nutshell, that's what we are trying to do, to be able to move and transmit these ideas to non-expert audiences using accessible language. Next slide, please. So I'm going to, last year, I'm going to borrow from a conference that was held here in Nairobi, where the KEMRI was having a conference on science communicators. And I know it's not the University of Nairobi, but we are borrowing. We also have participants from various universities here. So I'll just pick a couple of quotes on what they said in that meeting. So this is Dr. Erica Check-Hayden, the Director of Science Communication at the University of California, Santa Cruz. Society expects scientists to address critical issues like climate change and health crises. Though effectively communicating scientific findings, it's a complex skill that must be refined. You have the data, you have the findings. Now communicating these findings is the skill that we must refine. So Davis Mkonji, who's KEMRI's Deputy Director of Communications, journalists and researchers have a very different worldview of science communication, and it is critical for us to find a common ground between the two. Who breaks this information? Who breaks the data? Who tells us that this institution that you work for has actually broken this? I mean, you have found this data, you have made this discovery. How do we do it? Most of the time it is through media, it's through journalists, it is in the, in the reports that you do, in all of this data that you do, but you have very different worldviews of what this is. We have to find the common ground. And then we also have Dr. Patricia Kiuka. She's a KEMRI research scientist. Science doesn't have to be confined to academic journals. By meeting people where they are, whether that's on social media, at festivals, or through local theater, we can make science more relatable and impactful. Is science relatable? Is it impactful? So if we are not going to confine ourselves only to the academic journals and speak to ourselves, to speak to our colleagues, to speak to those of us within the profession. It's where we meet people. That's where we are saying on social media, at the festivals we attend, you know, at your local theater, if you're watching something, for those of you who take a drink after work, how are you able to make what you do more relatable to the person who you're speaking to? So this is where we come in terms of why we need to demystify the work that you do and to be able to present it to other audience. Thank you. Next slide, please. So why science communication? Why are we bothering with this? Why not keep the work that we are doing confined to the journals? Because it improves and enhances life by providing new information that improves decision-making at various levels of life, leading to solutions that may address gaps or challenges in life. That's why you're making discoveries. That's why you're going into the next frontier to figure out what has not been done. So when this information comes out, we are able then to help improve those who are making the decision with regards to how we live in terms of in the fields of medicine, in the fields of botany, how do we take care and appreciate our plants more? In the field of archaeology, how do we take care of what has been before so that the generations who are here and have no idea about the evolution chain, how are they able then to be able to do this? And that is why we are helping decision makers to give them more solutions to address these gaps. We also help to improve scientific research by providing new information to make methods safer or more ethical. Science communication promotes thought by encouraging debate and controversy. And we know there are a couple of controversial finds or developments that are found. So we encourage this debate. Does it work? Does it not work? Is it good for humankind? Is it not? What are the, what are the factors or what mitigated the circumstances so that we can be able to look for these discoveries? We encourage debate, we encourage controversy, and in the end, we hope to find a middle ground. Career enhancement by encouraging groundbreaking discoveries. So when you sit in the lab and you have this, you have these discoveries that you're making, okay? The mere fact that you have gone this way to this point helps somebody else who's coming, the students, after when they realize this is how far our professors or researchers have gone, then you encourage them to get in or to be able to continue and see how are we going to improve this research? How can we carry on? What can we do to make it better? Then we also do it to create business opportunities by attracting collaborations that result to commercialization of the innovations. This is really important. I know that universities are a lot of those that actually require collaborations, not only with other universities within the country and abroad. Funders, we do know, especially in foreign countries, that the funding window continues to become smaller and smaller, and we are all looking and angling for that attention. Where is our university placed in such a way where we are making great discoveries, where we have that visibility in terms of what we are able to do in terms of science? So this, this is where we are looking at and saying, we always need to be able to find ourselves, to attract collaborations. The University of Nairobi is doing ABC. The University of Abu Zara in Nigeria is doing ABC. How are we able to come together? Recently, I attended a screening. It was a media screening that was done where we had collaborations between Nigerian media practitioners and filmmakers and journalists and those from Kenya. And they were looking at different areas and they were actually answering the question of our scientific questions in terms of how they answer questions to some of these things or some of the issues that are challenging society. One of this, and especially the collaboration between Nigeria and Kenya, looked at the use of donkeys in transporting cold chain vaccines to be able to move them within, because these are both pastoralist communities. You know, the Maasai of Kenya and the Fulani from Nigeria. So how do they use, how are these cold chains, how are these mobile cold chains, how are they used using solar powered energy to be able to move down and aid the immunizations so that we can improve child mortality in those areas? And they looked at both of them, and it's amazing that it was similar. The use of boda bodas, or the people who go on the, on the motorcycles, that is how they're able to keep that cold chain going, of course, and they're the ones who move from one area to another. So things like those, and I'm talking about media, I know for scientific, it's more advanced and you know it better. So we want to attract these collaborations. We want to co-author publications. We want to have our universities speaking in other places, and this is how we need to communicate so that they know what we are doing here and we are able to take it out. And then the other one is we want to be able to influence law. This is very important. We do policy advocacy through this communicating scientific findings. And you know, advocacy is not loud. A lot of the advocacy, particularly in the science area, will never be that one for the streets where we shout, but we need to be able to ask ourselves, how do you pitch? How do you pitch a meeting with a legislator? How do you pitch a meeting with the teams in parliament that deal with innovations and research and things like that? And this is how we need to be able to move from our books and the labs and to be able to speak to those people. Can we take the next slide, please? As we wait for the next slide, we've realized also that COVID-19, which is also one of those medical, what do I call it, myths of medical or challenges of medicine, it has always been vulnerable to, the scientific discoveries have always been vulnerable to misrepresentation. But I think this became more clear when we encountered the COVID-19. And we see that, it just puts miscommunication on a global scale. If you think about it, we want to do the reporting quickly for us who do the reporting on the media side. But if it is without the time to do the adequate fact checking and to do the contextualize whatever it is or the findings that are being done, then we allow room for a lot of misrepresentation to occur where we are. So I think it's very difficult in terms of how we are doing this. So we need to be able to put ourselves in a position where we know what is going on. Okay, as they do the presentation, we look at your goal as a researcher of the practitioner. When you look at what you're supposed to do, okay, your goal as a researcher is to improve the impact of research through good research communications. We want to improve our impact of research. We want to communicate to policymakers. We want to influence policymakers with the result of our research. And how do we do that? We advocate for using robust evidence. What is it that we have? What is the evidence I have found produced by my project? And how do I advocate for a policy position that can be supported by the robust evidence from my project? What does my project say? How do I bring to you policymakers and I tell you this is the importance of why we are supposed to protect these animals? Why should we put more vaccines into people's hands? Why should the government put more money in this area? Why is this community being affected by XYZ? That is the research that we are looking for, and it needs to support the work that we are doing and how we are doing. So really, as a practitioner, this should be our goal. And then we look at then how we are able to communicate that. Can we have the next slide, please? So what is effective science communication? What do you mean, or what do we mean by effective science communication? Okay, effective science communication, what do we mean by that? How do we effectively communicate science? So how do we make it different from what we do? Can we have the next slide? We don't have the WooClap link for that. But So when we look at communication, we have the information source, okay? You're the person who is sending this information. We look at also how it's being transmitted. What are you using? What are the channels that you're using to be able to send this information? And sometimes when we have, when we are encoding or sending information out, the channels that we choose to use could have what we call noise. So we ask ourselves, what kind of noise can be, I mean, is it that is challenging what we, is challenging what we are doing as a information, as information transmitters. We have the psychological noise. When you are trying to transmit this message, you have what could be preconceived notions, people coming in with what they know as their ideas of what it is. This is how I know what I want to know. You could find somebody at the end of the way you're transmitting your message with their own emotional stress. So the way you pass that message, you get a different reception from the way you are transmitting it. And if you think about it, even in your homes or even on the way to work, when you are going to work this morning or when you're coming to the university, however it is, you can pass a message and it can be received in many different ways. So that noise is what we are looking at, and we are saying, how do we break the noise in terms of this information that we have to make sure that it receives or it is received in the destination in the way we have. We also have semantic noise, which also can break the channel or the way we want to communicate. We are talking about jargon, institutional jargon. We have a lot of that, okay? Where only you and your colleagues, when you're talking about something, are able to understand what it is. All these, all these acronyms that we use, language that is only a studio language, or lab language where we don't, the rest of the community does not understand. All this is semantic noise, ambiguous languages. We have cultural differences in interpretation. When you're a doctor who's working in a remote community like in Turkana, Kenya, and you find the prevalence or the notion in that place has been that women give birth in their homes, on a birthing mat at home within a specific way, in a specific way. So when you're looking at the mortality rates and you realize that they are so low in that area, and you come up together perhaps even with policymakers like the Ministry of Health, and you say we want to reduce the infant mortality and as well the maternal mortality rates in this place, how are we able to do that? But you're met with the information or the communication that in this community, women give birth in the homes. How do you make it work for them? You have to go through the cultural interpretations, the differences, and figure out what is it that these people do that we are able to include science in it so that we can be able to do that. And what do? You come up with a creative way and you bring in birthing stools in your hospital wards or in your dispensaries, or where the women are supposed to attend antenatal so that they can receive their shots, they can check that the child is well. How do you do that? And here you're dealing then with the cultural issues in interpretation. If you're doing fieldwork and research and you go to a particular community, the way you're dressed, the instruments you're using, the areas you're in, because I'm sure you're going to go to areas where people actually live. You're doing data collections or you're sending student researchers to do data collections. How do they deal with the cultural requirements for that area? Do you have places where then you're able to speak to that? So those channels where you're even speaking to them, even before you go to the place where you're analyzing samples, they still, even in data collection, there is communication that is supposed to be had. We're looking at the semantic noise. We are looking at the cultural differences in interpretation. Then we also have inconsistent information flow, which I'm sure for science is quite important, and you're able to see what the issue is. So how do we deal with this? How do we deal then with these channels or this noise to be able to ensure then that we are getting the right the right information? we have to pay attention to these audiences. We have to speak in a way that we are encoding clearly. We are avoiding the jargon, we are avoiding the technical terms that we are using, you know. And then now we are able to ensure that the message is decoded in the right way. It is received in the right manner at the appropriate time. And we're going to look at that so that everybody then is able to realize or to know how to be able to listen to us, or rather we have passed the message across. And then it gets to the destination or the receiver. And once the receiver has that message, okay, you have been able to present to your findings, to be able to see how it is done. Then you have the feedback loop where they're able to say, we get you, we have received this new discovery that you have, okay, this is how we are going to work with it. And even within your teams, you have junior researchers, you have senior researchers, you have processes, you have hierarchies. You know how this information is shared or transmitted. By the time you even think up a concept and you're able to pass it through your hierarchy, this also is the communication loop that you have to get, so that when you receive the feedback and you're told we are able to fund this, we feel this is not the right time to be able to get into this research, things like that, then you're able to go back and you go back to your information source and you rethink you rethink your position, you rethink your paper. So all that are communication components that we need to look at. The next slide, please. So we are looking at now in terms of this loop of hours. So the source of this information is the researchers who pass information about their work with an expert in ways that audiences can understand. When we are presenting or sending information to the audience, the source encrypts the message by selecting the words or sentences that will best convey the intended meaning. It's a groundbreaking discovery. Now, when we look at, for instance, if we are gaining new insights into how cancer infiltrates the body, okay, and the neurons that may be driving our impulse to eat. So how are you able to present that? Both to doctors, because you're doing the discoveries in the labs, to doctors, so that they can be able to disseminate this even to patients in a way that is meaningful to them, and so they are able to eat. When you think about it also in science, what are we looking at? If we find out that vitamin A is playing an expected role in wound repair, okay, and then and you think about what the stem cells do in an area like that, how do you pass this information to non-experts who are not in the lab in a way that they can understand? Because at the end of the day, science is about finding solutions. If the solutions are withheld with the scientists, with the doctors, with those who are doing this, then the people who are affected, who is you and me, it is your patients in the hospitals who hopefully we are able to give them alternative treatments and not only science and medicine and tell them you need to eat well and things like this. We want to be able to pass this information as scientists to the non-experts. And then what is the message we are passing? The message combines words to convey meaning, but it also considers how it is communicated through nonverbal clues, through sentence structure, grammar, style, and other factors. This is really in terms of how you communicate one-on-one. This is not only on scientific, but it is also how it is. Am I paying attention? If we are sitting, for instance, if we were sitting in a classroom and we are able to talk, is the teacher decoding what is going on in this? Is she decoding that that my classroom has actually signed off? I'm not here. If you're doing, if you're in a lab and you're doing experiments together, and this is the fourth time that your colleague has messed up with the experiment, you realize those are messages that somebody is conveying. They're probably not in the right mental state at the time. So are we able to take a break and to read this and to sequence this and to tell, maybe we do need to take a break or to figure out what is happening in that area? We're talking about communication and verbal clues. Also in terms of when you write emails and you're writing emails to people who are not within your profession, even marketers who could be not even in academic or scientific journals, because those ones speak your same language. But if you want to author a book based on your findings, how do you communicate this language to a publisher who is in India, okay, who you need to discuss in terms of how the book will appear, the person who's doing your layout, who is a desktop graphic artist, how are you presenting this message to them and telling them, this is how I want the pages to appear? The person doing your layout, how are you able to help them to be able to present, okay, your diagrams and all your findings to be able that they appear in a way that can be understood both by you as the researcher and your fellow researchers, but also to them so that they can be able to understand. If you miss a letter, if you miss a hyphen, if you miss the, you know, the structure, the sequencing that is required in this, it's broken. And so it gives a wrong information. This is how we need to communicate that message. How do we do it? And then the channels, when we talk about communication channels, these are messages that go to the source and a receiver via channel. You have face-to-face interactions. Today, we are doing this through a screen. We are doing through Skype. We are doing this through Zoom. You have speeches. You could be making a speech at a university. You could be using phone calls or voicemails. It could be on radio that you're either listening to or you're giving a presentation on. Public address systems, okay? When you're in the village and you're looking for, you're doing your research work into this, how are you able to rally the community together to explain to them what is happening so that they don't just feel that this group of people with white lab coats, they came here and they left things, they are assessing our water systems and then we do not know what they have done with them. All those things, it's important to communicate, okay? Different ways of spoken channels, okay? What are those? Okay, we have blogs, we have emails, we have written communications. They all comprise different channels that we use. And then your audience, the source is sending the message to the receiver. The receiver is me who's listening to you, giving your presentation. I will receive it, I will analyze it, I will interpret it also in a way that you as a researcher may not have intended for me to interpret this message. And so it is up to you. When I give you the feedback, you realize, you have gone the wrong way and that is not what I intended to communicate to you, what I was saying. And this is where you're given a chance to repeat yourself, or rather to re-explain yourself and to say what it is that you need to do. And then we have feedback. That's what I'm saying, okay? The feedback, whether it is verbal or non-verbal, it helps you to determine how poorly or inaccurately the message is received. So when you're giving feedback at the end of the day to Mr. Weda and you're telling him, I don't think the message was communicated clearly, or we still have gaps in 1, 2, 3, could you help us to be able to cover that topic and things like that? That is feedback. So we come back to the drawing board and we say, we were not able to cover this. We probably need a different session for this. You know, in terms of that is how you do feedback. For all of you based in research, feedback is important. When you go to a community and you're able to collect data from them and you come up with a finding based on it, do go back to the community using the simplest language that you're able to communicate. Have a public baraza, even with the leaders, the officials, the community elders in that area. And you tell them, based on the findings or the research that we did in this community, this is what we were able to find. And because of XYZ, we realize there's a problem here. We also realize then this is a problem that we need now to find a solution to. Or is this only communicated to your research journals? And you're able to talk about a community in a place like Maiduguri in the north of Nigeria, where the community there has no idea until they find a learned friend from that place or a headmaster who's able to read these findings, and they realize, oh, you're talking about my community, but I have no idea back home, or people have no idea that this has come from them. So I think it's important that we are able then to give feedback in whichever way or whichever manner, particularly from the places where we have sourced information, give feedback one or two. I know in research, it's very important that you're able to even do peer reviews amongst one another. And that's why you have your conferences, to be able to speak to one another, to say these are our findings, to challenge them, as we said, to have that discussion. And then we also talked about noise. We said that it's what obstructs the messages, regular encoding and decoding on the channel between the communication that is offered. So what's effective science communication? Next slide, please. This communication, it relies not only on the choice of the channel or where you're going to pass your information, but the timing of your message, okay? And this has 2 key pillars: effective messaging. Now we are going into where we are talking about communication to public audiences. And by this, I'll also say narrowing it down, like for instance, to media. So when you have these discoveries that you've made, okay, that you have made and that you have done. Now, let me give an example of what I found. I was looking at Rockefeller's, a page from the Rockefeller Foundation, okay? There are discoveries. Let me give an example of autism's missing link. Autism spectrum disorder is tied to more than 70 genes, and the lab of Mary Hayton has long focused on the link between the ASTN2 gene and cerebellar changes in children with autism, as well as other neurodevelopmental conditions. However, now you also look at things like hallmark. Okay, so they are using mice. So they looked at it and they mimicked these behaviors, including reduced vocalization, diminished social interaction, increased hyperactivity, and repetitive actions. When you think about something like this, as you have said, for those of you who are in this field, and I think autism is one of the things that has grown. We are still trying to understand why we have more children in the last 5 years on the spectrum than we've had in previous ways. How do you present, or who is your audience then for a finding like this? Where do you do this presentation? Even in terms of to a national audience, what is it that you're going to use as your catch to ensure that you're able to present these findings, okay? What medium will you use? How will you message this creation in a way that is impactful to a medium? If you are to speak in front of a community of parents, parents whose children are on the spectrum, and you're supposed to give the outcome of a discovery like this, how are you able to communicate this? What is your bait? When you're speaking to even the school or the institution, or they invite you, what is it that you're going to start with? Or even we who sit in different offices, in the communications offices, in the PR offices, how do we reach out to you? And I'll talk about that component later, about the link between your communications offices and yourselves, but how do we make it effective? And then the hook, how impactful is this message? So after you have done this and you've spoken to the parents, what is your call to action? What do you want them to do about this information that you have given them? Okay, has your message been impactful? So you have to think about that, the choice, okay, and the timing of your message. And then the successful audience targeting. Where is your audience? What do they consume? Okay, what is your audience? Are you, if you're speaking to marketers, okay, and you're a doctor and you people have discovered possibly, or a chemist, let me say a chemist, okay, or you work in the pharmaceutical space and you have a new medicine that you want to try out, you need to speak to marketers. You need to be able to tell them how different this product is, why doctors from the hospital need to remove this medicine from the shelves and to be able to replace it with yours. What does your audience consume? Okay, what is the user behavior? How do these hospitals react? Which ones of them take the generics? Which ones of them take all of these things? You need to look at your audience and what they consume. Now, when it comes to that, and purely on a scientific nature, even when you're going to present to your audiences in scientific conferences, which is more comfortable to you, what are you going to use? Are you going to write your white papers? Are we using webinars? Are we going to use technology notes to be able to share this information with them and break it down? Are you going to use a reference poster? If you're in a big conference and you're going to work, to present at a medical conference in Ohio, okay? Which posters are you going to use to carry as references, maybe in closed door sessions, so that they are able to refer to it not only at that particular point, but even later? We need to look at the audience and what they are consuming. Even if you're called, for instance, for a media interview, what is the best way to communicate? If you have, if you're speaking to a media house and your communications team has been able to secure an interview for you to discuss a groundbreaking discovery, we need to look at your audience, and your audience is not the presenter that you have, but it is the people who you're speaking to in the end users of this information you've done. What do they mostly use? What is their best method of discussing with them? So you have to do very good, successful audience targeting. Next slide. And you can see these days that when we are talking about audience targeting, we are talking about many ways. Our traditional conference style of disseminating information won't cut it. There's so much noise today. If you're among the young generation or Gen Zs who are very popular, they are getting heard, they will not be silenced. You need to realize that even as a researcher, you need to be able to speak to these audiences. And even your Gen Zs within your labs, your young students who are in the university years, your students who have just come into the workspace with you, you do know that they are born of a different temperament than you do. And so even the way they understand this information and the need for you to explain to them how accuracy needs to work in the labs is very important. So we look at how scientists are breaking this information. How are they teaching? Where are we looking at? In our audience research, what have we looked at? Okay, which social media tools? One of the people, when I looked at your feedback forms, they were asking for one of the ways in which they wanted to know how to do their presentations, and they've done their audience research, is they're asking, how do we use Web 2.0 tools to be able to disseminate my information to different people? So how do I use, like, for instance, a social networking site as a researcher to be able to speak to my audience about what we have found? The research has already been commissioned. We've been given the grant, we've finished, the papers have been written, I have done my presentation to a scientific audience, and my paper has been published in a journal. So how do I break it down? Think about it. How do you speak to your nieces and your nephews in terms of what you do, these discoveries that you're making, so that they are also able to debunk the information that they have received and to say, no, this is not the way it works. So I don't know how many of you think about also your roles in terms of public audiences when you're thinking about disseminating scientific information, what you can do. I believe also, because I've also headed a public relations department, it is not everybody who's allowed to speak to the media. But when you're able to find a middle ground with your institution and to be able to say, I think I'm good at this, I'm able to disseminate this information in simple ways with the use of graphics, I can give a 3-minute presentation on what I'm able to do, then that is how we are doing. In this day and age where everybody is seeking visibility, and it's very funny, like last week I was listening to one of Kenya's captains of industry, a lady by the name of Dr. Patricia. She said, you may be doing outstanding work where you are, even in that lab, even in that faculty where you're working in, but doing good work won't cut it. She said, this is the year to make yourself more visible, you know, and you know, always, even when we talk about partnerships, it's the institutions that are able to put themselves at the forefront. So how do we work in a way that allows for us to be able to be heard in these spaces? When you use technology that will allow you as your teachers and your students to collaborate, because these young people these days have very many ways of using tools. They're using tools that we are not privy to. So how do you sit down with them in the humility of ourselves and ask, how are we able to collaborate this information? So to create online content that is user generated, even in the online tools that we use for sharing, how are you able to share your findings so that one person can pick on from another one? So all of this, when we think about that, you know, and their benefits, that they're intuitive, they're user-friendly, that we can be able to use them. So this is what we are saying when we are doing science communication and we've done our successful targeting. Some of our targets may be young people. If you're working in a place where maybe you're working on HIV/AIDS, or you're looking at maybe transmission of viruses from one person to another, and you know many of them, how do you pass the message across to them, to large groups of audiences? If you're going, like, for instance, to a slum in Nairobi where there's prevalence of particular things like that, if you're in the field of medicine and you're trying to prevent mother-to-child transmission, okay, of from HIV mothers now to their children, and how you're able to speak to the communities, what are the local tools? How do we get down to the ground and we are able to do that research in that community, but using the adequate tools? We need to have done our audience research. Now, audience research, we've talked about it. Next slide, please. In the way we are going to do this, we've said we are going to be active listeners. We are going to look, even as we speak in our labs, at the end of the day, the communication we are doing is ultimately to give us a name in a scientific journal. But science is solving a problem. And what is that problem? And how are we able to communicate that information to ease? Now, when you're doing science communication, like we are saying, and especially to the media, okay, the media is the bridge between what you have found and to the outside audience. Even sometimes policymakers and lawmakers will learn about what you have done when they have seen or heard or read about it in the press. So we are looking at the do's and don'ts, okay? All right, when you do that, so we say, how do you communicate? We use simple, short, straightforward sentences. Sentence construction that is difficult to understand that is difficult to understand means that we are not understanding what you're trying to communicate, okay? We want to keep our phrases brief and direct. Say, please let me know when you can meet to discuss this matter, rather than I want to organize a meeting to discuss the important facts of the case at your earliest convenience. This is language that sometimes we use a lot. It's jargon, it's things that we are used to, but sometimes simple information can help us to get where we want. We've talked about avoiding jargon, okay? Things that only you and the academic journals can do, but now we're communicating to non-scientific audiences, okay? We're in a media studio. How do we break down the information we have? You know, all these carbon dating, even AI tools and things like that, okay? When we think about, you know, about cancer metastasis, what does that mean to a grandmother who's in her 70s and she has suddenly found out that she has ovarian cancer? How do you explain to her what is happening in her body? How do you give them the how do you speak to the family as they make the decisions between whether they are going to take their mom to India? Okay. How do you explain what a biopsy is in simplest languages to somebody who does not understand medicine in their language, in your traditional language, for those of you who are working even in that field and things like that? I'm just giving examples that are known to me. As you can see, I don't know the complex medical terms because that is also not my field, but that is yours. But I'm trying to help us so that we can be able now to communicate and to avoid using that when we are talking to people who do not understand, but also give them the information they need to be able to make decisions. Let's go to the next slide. We also want to be specific, be as explicit as possible. As much as I've said we need to avoid jargon, you need to be able to explain, like in terms of medicine and science, you need to tell the person who you're communicating to that even the details of what is going on with them, you know, with where you are, and with this example also of explaining to a new cancer patient, if you can have visuals to explain what you're doing, it's always better for them. When you're writing to somebody, avoid using vague or ambiguous details. If you're presenting yourself or you're speaking about yourself as a researcher, I've worked as a researcher for more than a decade. Rather than have a lot of experience working in this industry, you've been a researcher for 10 to 15 years, you've been able to, and you're focused maybe on 1 to 3. That's how you present yourself. And then we say, be conversational. Written communication should be more conversational in a style. Sorry, the next slide, we're on the next slider. In a style that is, more than academic or scholarly writing. As a general guideline, we write in a manner similar to how we speak. To be sure your writing seems conversational, read your message out aloud. It works very much in the scientific industry for you to be able to use this difficult academic or scholarly writing. But when you're writing for a news brief, if you're writing an op-ed, which we'll talk about tomorrow, an op-ed is opinion editorial in the newspaper. For instance, if we are celebrating World Water Day, or we are celebrating International Day of Persons with Disabilities, and there's been trials that are coming out on things that you're doing, how do you write for a general audience on a topic like that? Okay, yeah, so that's what we are saying. Make sure that you read your message, even your presentation, as you're presenting to people who do not understand you. Speak it out, read it to somebody. It might look funny, but it is better that you have your thoughts out aloud and you have said them to somebody or you've read them about, so that it also helps you even to acquaint yourself with what you've written than what you're talking. And then we also say we avoid the gendered language, okay? Where possible, if you're not sure, especially about your audience or the person that you're making reference to, if you do not know the name of the person, like for instance, if where you have those names that are between male or female, dear sir or madam, you know, or you just write dear Mucheke. If you do not know, is Mucheke a man, is it a woman, what is it? You know, that's what we are saying. When you're communicating to somebody and like you're introducing yourself, let's avoid the pronouns for where we are. We also know this is also another area of a deep complexity, particularly in the West, in terms of he, she, male, and they sign off sometimes their emails with that, you know, are you binary, non-binary, all those things. So where we can, and some people take it very personally in some context, so we need to avoid this gendered language where we can, when you know your audience. And then we say use active rather than passive words. Okay, it will help. This helps you to actually sound more conversational in your writing. Okay, then we are still talking about written communication. The next slide, please. We say appropriate humor. When you're doing a presentation, okay, you only use humor when circumstances call for it and in moderation. Avoid making jokes if you don't know your audience well, to avoid offending them. You can use comedy in your writing. That is if you're doing a presentation to different groups. If you know your audience, if you're speaking to your faculty and you know your colleagues and you know one another, that's different. You can even make a joke that is known within your faculty or that is known among your peers. But if it is a different group and you have no idea, you're speaking to the VC and you're a junior researcher, you know, there you actually realize that these are some familiarity that crosses the ground. So you also say that we need to stay from crude or controversial humor when you're presenting your topics, because humor is required. Okay, if you're doing a 2-hour presentation or a 3-hour scientific, sometimes you need to cut through you need to cut through the science and to be able to speak in a manner to break the ice. But also we say it needs to be in familiar ground. No matter how skilled a writer you are, you should always proofread your writing. Proofread the emails, proofread your articles, especially for mistakes. When we receive sometimes citations or things like that. And these days, especially in Kenya, where we have a huge monster that we call Kenyans on Twitter. Okay, you have a government email or document that is sent out, and they've already scrutinized the date is wrong. They've scrutinized the spelling of this name is wrong. you wrote antimatter, nucleus, but you spelt it nuclei or things like that, and they tear you up. So I think it's important that we are always there to inspect spelling, grammar mistakes so that it conveys the intended audience. If you're writing to a senior editor and you're telling them and you're making a pitch to be able to communicate, if you're writing to the DVC and you know that you need their support in something, always ensure that when you're communicating, even one-on-one to these people, then you should always check up this information for them. Now, when we look at all of this, and we've looked at, we were looking at how should our communication be effective, okay? We've looked at effective messaging, how to use the right hook, how to engage. We've looked at successful audience targeting. We've looked at the medium, okay? Where are we passing this information from? We've looked at the do's and don'ts. Now, when we think about, next slide, science communication that has gone wrong. So imagine you're this person, eh? You're explaining a complex climate change model using highly technical terms in the public interview, leaving the audience confused. Now, the truth of the matter is, as much as we talk about how much climate change is affecting us and our communities and the weather patterns and what is affecting that and how it is, climate change is also one of those issues that is still complex for people to be able to understand. When you talk about carbon credits, when you talk about how countries are influencing one another, who is buying what, who is investing in what, it's still complex and it needs to be broken down in a way that is important. For instance, if you call journalists together to be able to present something within this area of climate change, you need to be able to give them appropriate ways of explaining this information, many times with examples to be able to help them. Like, for instance, when you think about even the controversy that is now globally with regard to the wildfires that have raged in LA that flattened an entire seaside area, okay, with a high value properties that were destroyed. When you think about this, what is the answer to that? What is the answer? What have we found is the result, the solution? Everybody has blamed each other, you know, the mayor, the council, and all of these things. When we are using technical terms in public interviews and we do not know, the audience does not know how to understand, there we have, I think we have missed the point, and we need to go back to our feedback loop and ask, how do we do this better? A news headline that overstates the findings of a news study to attract clicks, creating misinformation. One researcher, doctor, actually said this happened to his team, where one of his team members overstated something that they had found, and it had to do with an archaeological thing. And they say that once they came down, because this was presented, and then he overstated what they had found. But when they came down to actually researching and to people prodding and figuring out, what did you say you found out? Because this is peer review. Okay, so lab A has said that we have found this. So how do you do that? They say that it creates misinformation. You already have the clicks. People have read it. Your message about what you found in Kiambu County in Nairobi has been read by somebody in Seattle or somebody in Tanzania. So how are you able to communicate this and to be able to say this was our findings? So we've overstated what we found. Okay, so this creates misinformation. And misinformation is what is it called? Misinformation is bad because it also creates doubts. And you know, science is actually about, it's there or it's not there. I don't think in science we allow middle ground like many of the different disciplines like arts, you know. We have found, we have not found. Does it work? Does it not work? The other thing could be a researcher presenting a complicated graph without providing clear context or explanation during a public lecture. And public lectures attract everybody, including the watchman at the faculty where you are, or the person who is cleaning the room nearby and listening into you. So if we have a complicated graph with a group or an audience, and we are looking at public, remember here is public, we've moved from your faculty. How are you able to present this in a way that somebody will understand. After you've used the technical language and things like that. So for us to communicate to non-scientists, we need to be able to give a clear context of where we are coming from and where we are going with this communication. So I think, how do we correct this? Next slide. How do we correct where we have communicated wrongly? We develop a plan to communicate. Okay, so we've done the scientific discovery. We've done our journal article. It's in. And the journal articles, you know, they have these detailed descriptions of our experiments. We've got our peer-reviewed work where the scientific community has weighed in. Now, how do we then disseminate further what we have done? How do we say that we have found a cure for XYZ in this? We develop a plan to communicate. And in the communication strategy, which is important, and I think in the next, after we take the break, we're going to look at the importance between the scientific unit and your lab and what you do, and the communications at your institution. How do you work together? We need to define your goals and objectives for what we want to communicate. Why must I communicate this finding outside of the peer-reviewed or outside of a research journal? How do I identify my target audience? We talked about policymakers, we talked about communities, we talked about people with the capacity to influence. We are talking about donors. We are looking for money to be able to fund our next research to keep us in this project. Otherwise, if a project doesn't get funding, we're not able to continue. We put the scientists on hold. You put your, what is it called? You put your community educators in the field who are supporting you with that research on hold. And then we also have to choose in the communication plan, we choose what the appropriate channels are to get this information out. We have to develop compelling key messages. I am here, I have discussed with you. If you forget anything else about what I have said, 1, 2, 3, those are my key messages. I've come here to tell you 1, I've come here to tell you 2 and 3. That is how we do it. And then we measure the results. How do we know if we influenced the people we communicated? For instance, if you call a press conference, how do we communicate? I mean, how do we look at our results? We measure results by how many appearances did we get in the media? How many calls for clarification did you get from XYZ? Where else have you been invited to be able to speak about this groundbreaking discovery that you have been able to do? We correct wrong communication by starting from the beginning. This is, we develop a plan to communicate. And once we develop the plan to communicate, then we are able to see how we can move beyond just saying what we are saying to, beyond what we have found, to be able to speak or to communicate what we want to do. Now we have come to the end of this session. And before we take a break, I would want to ask whether there are any questions in terms of the module on scientific reporting, what it is, because in our next module, in the timetable, we're going to look at planning concept central. So apologies, can you hear me again?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Okay, quite clearly, as you can see, I'm not, I don't know, I had an IT hiccup, but I was asking, do we have any questions at the moment so that we can be able to, from that module before we take, our break has come in a little bit early, but no problem. on that? Do we have any questions or feedback on that in terms of science communication? I do know that in your, in the discussions that you did and in the feedback forms you sent, a lot of you said that you had already done presentations out, but many of you have not communicated in terms of media communication. And we'll get into that in the next session. And feel free if you also have hands up, because like we said, for those of you who are able even to share expertise in terms of this, would also like to see what went wrong. If you have any anywhere where you think we can learn from you in terms of something that you did or a presentation that you made to an unscientific audience, I'd want to hear, like for instance, anybody who's had experience with communicating to policymakers, your findings and how that went and what we can borrow for you. And secondly, from community, because I feel as much as we communicate with policymakers, communities are really important, especially for those of you who get your research from the communities where you live, and maybe you're there in the field doing your field work now, and then your next cycle is when you go back to collect data again after a year. So anybody with any feedback? I lost the previous questions, but I can see David's question. David says, what do you think is the best approach to policy communication, bringing governments to implement or integrate evidence in their projects? Best approach to policy communication, bringing governments to implement or integrate evidence in their project. I think the issue of government is actually an important one. And for those of you who also work in these research institutions, you even know best or better how the chain of command goes in terms of them. But I think every government wants to work with its researchers and its research institutions, because it's not only a win for your research institutions, it's a research for the country as a whole. When you think about the discoveries we've made, even here in Kenya, even this University of Nairobi is a huge player globally in terms of university rankings globally. When you think about even university rankings, how are we ranked in Africa? We are ranked a lot by the research that we output. Are we researching enough output to be able to do this? So it's important for us. And in terms of policy communications, bringing governments on board, you have to do it. But I think you need to also engage the right groups or the right individuals who are tasked with that. And there are different ministries that do that. And you cannot start with the minister, you start with the policymakers within the industries. That's why networking is important. Remember, we talked about, when we talk about engaging audiences, and you're talking to somebody who you know, you're sharing a drink together, or you're in a meeting, or you even attend a wedding and you exchange pleasantries, and you find out that this person actually works for government. Where do you work? Oh, by the way, I work for this institution. We've been doing a groundbreaking discovery in this and this. Would you be able to help me to find? And I know that the academic institutions are very good with actually working with government and researching those things because of how technical it is, you know. So just being able to integrate that, your project, and to integrate the ones that the government are doing would have to do with a lot of networking. That is what I would say. I know I probably don't know the technical way of doing that, and that's why I'm waiting for hands up to have somebody who has a bit of that in terms of how they engage. I do know that in the field of law, for instance, because I worked in an organization where we were trying to influence different policies, or the government to ratify 1, 2, 3 things in an organization that I worked with. And you have to actually find the arm that works in that in that sector. You have to sit down with them. You have to explain what you do. You have to explain to them why it's important to them. And I always say, think about the people. Think about how these discoveries we are making are very high end for us, but how do they impact the common person on the ground? You know, in Kenya, we say the mwananchi, but now more than ever. So if you have, I'm saying if you have a expertise in that, perhaps you can also share with us, because we're learning from one another. We're learning from one another in that. But it is not, we don't do it top down. We start from those who are even doing the research, who are able to speak to the heads of this before then we go as an institution to be able then to speak to government, to be able to tell them. And government is the people who are within that area or sector. Like if you're doing mining, you speak to the Ministry of Mining and Industry to be able to share what you want to do. So that's what I would say. Any other questions that were there previously? Maybe Nicole, if you can see any, or any comments, or anybody who's willing to share with us before we take a 15-minute break. Any thoughts, feedback? Okay, Didier, I think, yes, you can share with us. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Sorry, I can't put my video for now, but I can talk very well. So I'm very happy to be here because I'm very passionate about science communication, and especially communicating science to people who are not necessarily professionals. So my little experience communicating with policymakers has been in the mental health field. And from because I'm a clinical psychologist in training, and also a health communicator. So my approach has really been to make sure that the language which I use should be very plain, as simple as possible, because technical terms in most cases makes the conversation boring, and they feel like they are really not understanding. And most of the time, since there are people that are really busy, the first few seconds when they don't understand, it becomes extremely difficult for you to continue. So I really make sure that I use very, very simple terms and things that really concern them. I really make sure that if it's the Ministry of Social Affairs, I talk of things which are along her agenda, so that she relates, she link mental health with social affairs things, or etc. So that is a strategy which I often use when I approach policymakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that example. Mental health is an issue that cuts across everywhere. Even for yourselves within the office, we are looking for breaks. We are looking to be able to ensure that our minds are in the right faculty to be able to carry out these activities that we do, this research we are doing. And so Didier has shared, and it's true, when you speak to the Ministry of Social Services, you have to have your pitch. He's talking about your pitch. In the first 3 seconds, are they interested? Are they not? Because you're meeting them, running out of one meeting to another. The people who prepare their policy papers and their briefs are also people that, if it is a government institution that you work with from time to time, those are people that you also need to know. It's not only the government, the face of government, who is the cabinet secretary or the minister or the PS within there, but even the people who work within that office. Because even as they are preparing these briefs on behalf of, like, for instance, you're opening a mental health colloquium, you know, for the country somewhere, they will have written briefs for them. And who writes those briefs? It's the people who are working with them. So I would say, like you're saying, the pitch has to be quick, it has to be accurate, and then they'll tell you, okay, speak to my team. They'll be able to organize a meeting for you, and then you brief that team. You tell them exactly what you're thinking about so that they can understand. You're communicating to them, and then make it important and make it matter for them. At the end result, I say it's good and important to think about, like he's saying, so you talk about an aspect of mental health and research carried out, and you think about how does it affect the society, so that then it will matter to them. And at the end of the day, then you're solving a problem for society, because that's what we try to do for science. So thank you very much for sharing your example, Didier. very useful for us to take notes of. Anyone else? Kevina will be in touch as with Nicole in terms of how the presentations will be shared when we are done with this. Any other question? Okay, Nicole, I don't know whether I have permission or you can just set us off to be able to probably take the break in 10-15 minutes, and then we can come back and do the second session.
Okay, thank you for that, Ms. Ann. So we can take a few minutes break. We'll be back at around 11, then we'll continue from there. So in the meantime, just take time to get a cup of tea or water to refresh yourself as we come back to the next session. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our session. We are ready to continue with the next presentation from our presenter. I hope you had enough time to take a short break and comprehend what you have learned in the previous presentation as we continue to go forward. Ms. Ann, welcome.
Thank you very much, Nicole, once again. So welcome back for after your break. I hope you have stood up, stretched, had these days they're called what? They're called mental health breaks. Whether you had something to eat or drink with it. So we're going to our second discussion of the day. And here we are looking mostly on an area that I'm quite conversant with, which is helping you to think of media interview tips, okay? And remember that these tips are not just for you. If Nicole, you can also start the presentation again. They're not just for you because you're going to carry out a media interview tomorrow, okay? The tips that we're giving you here are for you to work with anybody, even within your own space. As I had said before, I'm always a firm believer in communication as an whole aspect. If you work for an institution and the drivers and the cleaners in that place do not really understand what your institution does, we're not doing a very good job of communicating internally. And I know internal communications is often viewed as what the director is saying, what the vice chancellor is saying, what we want to have as an institution. But think about your institution winning when your receptionist is able to respond to a question on phone from somebody. If, for instance, I call and I ask you, I hear that you're launching a product or you have a book launch on such and such a day. Can you please help me? It is by Nicole. She works here at TCC. Your win is if your receptionist is able to go through your keyboard and to find Nicole quickly, but also to tell you, yes, we are having a launch for that book. It is going to be on such and such a day. Now, with an institution where you're probably 1,000 members of staff or faculty, or even plus students included, and students are definitely way more than that, it's not going to be possible. But if the secretary in your department picks up the phone on behalf of this team and she's able to respond to that, it means that you have won. So communication is all encompassing. It also means that if you're able to speak to your child and they say, oh, mommy works at so-and-so, so what does she actually do? You know, without even having take your child to work there, you can tell them, I'm actually going to be away for the next 2 months. I'm going to be engaged in a research on so-and-so, or I'm traveling for work in ABC. I think we need to realize that the people around us are in far better spaces to actually even appreciate what we are doing so that they can be our biggest champions in what we are doing. So we're looking at media interviews, and this first image this is you doing a presentation, and you've seen you have your pie graphs, you've explained clearly, but the people on this end, and you can see there are different types. It could even be the people, the donors who are funding your research. They're asking you, when are you publishing this paper? So that's the whole end for what they are interested in. And even media sometimes, it's not even sometimes the substance that they're looking for, although science journalists are always looking for what is the real thing that we are doing. I think also we need to understand that in Africa, unfortunately, the truth is that our systems have not allowed us to specialize very much, where you even have one of you as scientists coming to work in a space of media where you're able to explain these concepts and break them down to readers in ways that we are able to understand, because you have the gift, you have the knowledge, you have the expertise in being able to do that. So that's what I'm talking about, how we are able to scale up the information that we have to the next group of people. So our next slide. Now we want to report our scientific discovery. A lot of the times, this reporting can look like a case of broken telephone, okay? Now, every step that we take, that is from our scientific findings to the journal articles that we produce. Then after we've released our journal articles, we expect our communication teams to prepare a press release to explain what it is about. The press release, the good thing is it will come from the institution you work for. So it will be credible, it will be correct, it will have the facts, it will have the terminologies, you'll have managed a way to break it down to explain. And then the press release is churned by the media into a news article. Then the news article finds its way into social media, either by clipping, what it is, you know. Then every step that we take, it amplifies some fear, it loses the nuance, and it loses the context. Because for you, as a person who wrote this paper, you're supposed to simplify it, or who did this research, you're supposed to simplify it. And the further it is simplified from your journal article of 10 pages to a 1-page press release, okay? Then the news article also finds its way into other and talks about other people, or talks about how others have correlated, or somebody has debunked your findings. Then it goes into social media where it enters its own space. And in that space, you find a lot of information and disinformation. So you find that Matthew Shipman has said that scientists are often nervous about being interviewed by reporters. This is usually because they are worried that reporters will misrepresent their work or take their quotes out of context. Then you're taken out of context, and then your boss comes and says, "Ulisema nini? How could you misrepresent the organization?" So it's a bit tricky, but we are here to actually find how we can find that middle ground. Remember, that's our point, is that we each value each other. We each value this space we are in, but we want to be able to see that this reporting, the discovery, is not a chain of exaggeration. We are not exaggerating anything. We want to report the finding. We want to be able to come with an outcome for it. So let's see how we can lose this nervousness, because it's what we need to be able, to be able to do, and to do it well. Remember, I said, next slide, that between this journal article and press release, we have what we call the research communication teams. You know where you work, you know how your offices look like, unless you work in a silo organization where you're very few. But even with the few that you are, especially if you have projects and you have budgets where you have received sponsorship and research grants to be able to do something, it means that there's somebody at the other end of that grant who is waiting for feedback, who's waiting for information, who's waiting for data, who's waiting for it to be analyzed. You need research, you need communication teams to support the work that you do, or somebody who will be able to help you synthesize that approach and find the right findings. So in big institutions, you'll have this. I know at the University of Nairobi, you do have your communication teams whose work it is to be able to amplify these things that you're doing. Now, it's important because they're the liaison between you and the press, between you and where you want to go. Even if you're going for a conference outside, the banner that you're taking representing your institution has to have been borrowed or made from through the communication teams, because you need to get your university logos right. You need to be able to have your institution well represented in the right way, with the right format, with the right colors. They need to be able to help you to pitch. If you have a LinkedIn profile, we need to be able to ensure that your pictures are well done. We need to be able to know that you have the right interface, or even if you want to do things or to write that op-ed, let's see that it has passed through the liaison between you and the press office. It's important that departments must coordinate with this office for effective communication. And this is what I say, that because we also have discussions in comms teams about how this works, your point is not to run to them when at the end of your discussion. I dare say that these are teams that we need to integrate from the beginning of what you're doing, in terms of even as you're going out into the field and you have something that you know in the next 6 months, in the next year, is actually going to be groundbreaking discoveries. You need to pop your head into those communication teams and figure out what's going on in that space, okay? And to tell them, by the way, we are working on this project, A, B, C, and D, okay, with support from this, because they'll be there when you're signing the MOUs between you and this university, between you and these partners, between you and those donors. They'll take the photos, they'll tell the what, but what have we really signed? So you go in and you explain, this is what we are actually planning to do, this is what you're doing. For effective communication and for them to have you at the back of your minds, it's good to be able to pop your head into that department. And then we remember that they are published papers. They need to be presented to this office for mass media coverage, okay? So we have the finding, how do we communicate? We need to publicize the work that is done by the facility. This is usually collaborated, okay? So the scientists in University B, which is all across the Indian continent, and this university, they need to work together. They need to see how they can collaborate, where we can discuss this, how do we present this? The donor needs to be visible, okay? So when you're doing your findings, they also need to be represented. How do we introduce them? How do we speak about them? They will also act as a coordinator in the press conference, and he helps you to direct questions. Are the questions directed at the research team? Are they directed at the media? Is it the media that needs to amplify? And also they can read. They can read where the media is getting lost, and they can say, perhaps we can take this question from this angle. And if you need press interviews, especially as management, they are going to organize this. Therefore, there's a need to cooperate with these teams. I say we need to make these relationships a priority. And even for people who are in the social media space, and they're usually highlighting or talking about what the organization is saying, because the organization will have their visibility page. There's the universities, what is it called, website, okay, which will constantly have updates on what is happening. And then you're going to have, of course, your social media pages, whether it's going to be X, formerly Twitter, whether it's going to be Facebook, which allows us to say longer things, to have photos, to have more visibility, whether it's going to be Instagram. For those of you who are young enough to be on TikTok, I think we need to be able to work with this team so that we can even amplify what they are saying and provide clarity. A new trend in 2025, one of the new PR trends, that's public relation trends we are looking at, is we are moving from the space where teams are hiring influencers. And I think this is not the trend with most of you in the research world. Influencers to actually front their staff to be able to do the work of amplifying what is going on in that space, okay? So your teams will come together and they'll say, let's do a video about what's happening in the lab today. Or you do know when and where they are not invited in, and they also know what's a good time, where can we come in, where can we do a brief interview of what you're doing. This is the whole idea that the research team does. And the output doesn't need to come from them. It can also come from you in terms of You tell them, we have something we need to say. Is it possible that we can find a right time? In the UN calendar of dates or events, when you look at what we are celebrating every year, okay, what are we celebrating this year? How do we amplify that? How do we amplify the International Day of so and so, the International Mental Health Week? Mental Health Week is a big thing in Kenya even. So how do we amplify that information? Okay, sometimes you have the ideas, share them with these teams, figure out how we are going to be able to speak that and become a voice for your organization. LinkedIn is very powerful. What are you saying on LinkedIn? Okay, you can check, are we on the right track? Are we saying what is allowed? So this communication team, I dare say that we should make them a priority for us, because then they will help us in the next steps that we want to take. Now, the communication team has come up. Let's go to the next slide. And they've told you, so Anne, you have, we've prepared an interview for you with this newspaper. We are going to have a press release. We're going to have a press briefing, okay? The press briefing is taking place on this and this day. We want to communicate this. The Vice Chancellor will be speaking. We have the head of the institute who will be presenting this discovery. We have our chief researcher who will be speaking, but the project is yours, so you'll have to say something about the discovery that you said. How do we prepare for this interview? One of the things that we need to do, remember we talked about having a communication roadmap. So we need to prepare a single communication objective with 2 or 3 secondary points that you want to make in that briefing. As you plan something, the same way you plan your presentation in front of your peers, you plan your presentation, even if you're doing your thesis, like for master's or PhD, which is in front of a panel. You anticipate, what questions are they going to ask me? What are they going to do? Especially the hard ones. What are the key messages you want to highlight? Because you're going to sum up this 50,000 word count into something small, okay? All right, so you answer the questions as briefly as possible to yourself, and then you offer a bridge to your message. If you can provide the reporter with a written summary of information, your main points, your statistics, you should do so in advance. What happens is, for accuracy, this is an important document, that summary report for what your finding is about, where it has been, what the research background was it, and then this is the eventual findings. It's really important so that then they have a document that they can look at, they can quote, to avoid, especially if it's on technical subjects. So we said that they always need perspective. For instance, for it to make a human interest story, or for it to even make news, they're not going to begin with XYZ has found. They'll say about 100 people who are affected by XYZ, or when you talk about, for instance, waterborne diseases that have been found in this place. Why is it so prevalent in this area? What is happening? The dispensaries are affecting, but now this research has found the solution, and we are able to mitigate further illnesses, waterborne illnesses in this area. They need to know how many people are affected. What is the scope? When did the issue arise? Is this part of a national trend, or it only happens in a specific area? Okay, like for instance, when you think about twins, and there's a prevalent where you say in this is the community that has the most twins globally. I think it's in some Asian country. Why is that phenomenon important? Why does it happen so much in there? What is in the water that they are drinking, or what is it in that area that it is? So we need to put the issue into perspective, even if you find that the reporter is not asking the question, but you preempt those questions that you are going to ask with your scientific mind. Remember, I've always said your point of information. Think about how you're going to explain this concept to your spouse who has no background information in that area, and to be able to break it down to them. Now, I'm going to ask that we enter into a small discussion, okay? And I'm going to give you a topic for us to discuss. We are many. I'm going to ask if Nicole can support us with a breakout rooms for this. 1 minute, so that we can just talk to each other. I know many of you have not, probably have not had a chance to even say hello to different people who are talking. And okay, so let me just give you the question. Just 1 minute. Okay, I hope you've seen it. So we are talking about agenda setting, yeah, for a meeting. The question I'd like us to discuss in these groups, look at it. What gaps are posed in agenda setting of NGOs? Agenda setting is what is the main key? What is the key problem? What is the key thing we want to discuss? In agenda setting of non-governmental organizations and grassroots organizations in getting matters of environmental justice discussed in climate change agreements. So you have those that are working in the local areas, okay? Or maybe you work for one of these NGOs, okay? How is the challenge in getting matters of environmental justice discussed in climate change agreements? Because the agreements that are made globally, especially by the big five, the ones who are introducing and paying smaller countries for use of carbon and all those things, okay? So when you think about this and you come from your small community or your small NGO, what are the gaps, okay, in these NGOs in getting matters of environmental justice discussed in climate change agreements? If we can have a few groups just discuss this for 15 minutes, and Nicole will organize us in these groups, it would be, I would want us to just discuss amongst ourselves these gaps where they are not able then to challenge or to get issues of environmental justice discussed in these agreements. So that we can get into breakout groups. Okay, so Jackie is saying, I repeat, we are looking at gaps that are posed in agenda setting of NGOs and grassroots organizations to have matters of environmental justice discussed in climate change agreements. Climate change is the big buzzword. In fact, I find that a lot of the jobs that are coming is in the issue of climate change, okay? So when you're working in that area and you're doing climate change research, or you're mitigating, or you're offering solutions, like Greenpeace and organizations like that, especially at the NGOs, why are we having gaps where environmental justice, you know, we are not, maybe in Africa, we are not the big people who are causing pollution and things like that, but why are these things not being discussed when we are doing the climate change agreements at a global level? So that's what I'm asking for. What gaps do we have there? That's what I would like us to discuss. That's what I'd like us to discuss in our groups. Nicole, are we able to get into breakout rooms?
Yes, we are working on it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, there, thank you. Okay, we are almost all back. Very good discussions from all the groups. The few I was able to join, and I'll invite those who are
Hello, good morning, Abigail.
those who are leading their teams to just give us 2 or 3 reflections on that question, because I found what began sort of like a shaky question or start to the discussion elicited a lot of rich responses. And thank you for just talking to one another and communicating. So I can maybe from the first group, if you can just give us 2 to 3 points that came out of your reflections with one another. And the subsequent groups, also share something that has not been shared. Please mute your mic so that we can share. Maybe we have 1 person per group to just give us the feedback.
Okay, so can I proceed?
Okay.
Yes, John, thank you.
So could you please mute Henry David, maybe so that I can proceed? Okay, thank you.
Go on, John.
So thank you for the opportunity. So in our group, there are various points that our dear members have highlighted. And one of the point is that when you come to these small NGO organizations, they are normally sidelined when the key decisions are being made. Actually, it was in the opinion of the contributors that the NGOs from the foreign countries actually dominate during the signing of climate change agreements. Then the other issue was concerned the financial constraints. So finances have been a problem, and therefore it becomes an expensive affair when you come to the NGOs, especially from the developing countries. Another challenge that was highlighted concerns the language used in those agreements. So rarely do they communicate in a favorable language. The language is actually technical. To the layman, it may not be easier to understand the key elements of the agreements signed. Those are the 3 points, but there are quite a number. Maybe I can add 3 more. Like normally there's lack of accountability during the implementation process in such a manner that the concerns from the grassroots levels are rarely captured in those agreements. And even the follow-up concerning their implementations, if indeed they are actually taken seriously, that follow-up is actually weak, especially when you come to the governments that lack the political will. Then there are also some complications when claims are launched to seek the environmental justice. So normally bureaucracy is an issue there. So the process becomes so lengthy, complicated, and they hamper the process of implementing the climate change agreements and the environmental justice. And then there is also this point of the NGOs, in many cases, they lack adequate data, so that it becomes quite hard to argue their case during the agreement signing. This is normally a challenge, especially in Africa, where if the scientific data is needed in a particular issue, then the data may actually be rare. So in that case, then you realize that the developed countries dominate because they have advanced scientific researches in that area. Then there was one member who argued that sincerity of those countries that meet the climate change, it's very hard to tell about it. So they normally use it as a way of manipulating the process. And rarely do they keep their part of the bargain. Maybe that might be debatable, so the members may contribute in this forum. So those are our few points we came along with. And members, you can feel free to add more or debate about the same. Thank you.
No, thank you, John. Those are such rich such rich feedback, and thank you for your group for coming together with this. I've had 3 things that we have also included here: language, technical language being there. We've talked about financing. We've talked about honesty and bureaucracy. We've also talked about agenda setting. The countries that are fronting this agreement, are they sincere in what they are doing, or do they not keep their end of the bargain? So all of these are critical in terms of even how, and if you think about it, we are talking about now climate change, environmental injustice, but even within the spheres where you work, some of these points can actually, you can find pointers to the places where you work. So either feedback from this, or we can take also comments from
Ann, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm saying we can take feedback from either this group or the next group. Didier, are you same group or another one? You can give us your feedback.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm from group 2. So it was interesting to raise some issues. The first issue we could raise was the issue of knowledge gap. Sorry. There seems to be a knowledge gap as what concerns climate issues in Africa. The question is how knowledgeable African governments are about the impact of climate change on the world, especially that the evidence from the south, from the north rather, puts forward that it's more of the north which is polluting, and the impact is felt more on the south. So how knowledgeable African governments on the issue? Now, the second point we tried to raise was the issue of accessibility of information. Now, who does the research? Because this is important, because the power relationships with respect to research affects everything. So who does the research? In fact, wouldn't there be a bias if the research is being done by the ones who pollute more? And obviously the impacts for decision making are tremendous. So these are the issues which we try to put on the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Didier. Very rich as well. Miriam Ruth, I know your group also had a couple. Well done. Thanks a lot for those. We'll collect this information.
Thank you very much. Our group had a number of deliberations on the topic, and one of the points that we raised were cultural differences between the communities. And in this case, we were looking at this in the matter that the communities have, let's say, a livelihood based on some of the activities that will negatively impact climate change. And when these organizations go to these communities, they won't take that in consideration, and they will just encourage them to stop such activities. One example given here was for the communities that are involved in charcoal making activities. And if such people are being told to stop their source of livelihood, there won't be proper cooperation with the organizations. And the other point was that in this case of influencing climate change activities that will contribute to a reduction in the progress of climate change, these communities aren't well explained to what is climate change, what contributes to climate change, and how can it be mitigated. In this case, mostly there will be use of force to enforce what the organizations think. And this results in mounting of resistance from the communities. But the other bit would be that these the community organizations may not involve the local leaders or the community leaders. In many cases, we find that communities will respect these community leaders or their local leaders, such that if the information is passed through their community leaders, communities will be able to abide by what is being suggested. And then another point is that usually there is a mismatch between the effects that are due to climate change globally and those that are faced at the local level. Without these organizations explaining to the layman how these activities affect their standards of living, their quality of life, they will feel like this is a far-fetched idea and they won't be cooperative. And another factor is that sometimes there are competing interests between the stakeholders. Some people or some governments could be mostly interested in the monetary benefits that are shown to be involved in combating climate change rather than setting up systemic interventions that will have a long-term impact on mitigating the effects of climate change. And some of these examples could be, the one example that was listed was the displacement of the Maasai communities in a bid of conserving the environment. I don't know if I can continue. We had a number of points.
Okay, Miriam, we have another group, I think, that hasn't presented. Very, very enriching discussions. I think also your group was quite well coordinated, and we've had, I think it's, you have a lot in terms of, which I like, in terms of the essence even and the feedback for this discussion. And this is what we are looking at, because we won't cover everything, but just hearing from all of you what your thoughts are is what we are looking to do. Nicole, I think we had one last group. If I'm not wrong, were they 3 or 4?
There were 4.
There were 4. So one last group, we hear from you.
Hello.
Yes, yeah, Eric's group.
This is Eric. I'm presenting for Group 4. So from our group, we identify a couple of challenges in the agenda setting for NGOs and the grassroots organization in pushing for these environmental justice issues when it comes to climate change agreements. And these challenges include the structural, political, and some of the practical barriers when it comes to implementing these agreements. One that came out clearly and which was recurring among the members in this group was the power imbalance in these international negotiations, whereby we found that the dominant state actors are often find that they engage in climate agreement are often state-driven, with limited government holding the primary decision-making authority. And this limits the influence of NGOs in grassroots organizations, and which lack the formal negotiation rights. Also, we had an issue with which came out clearly, the influence of these wealthy nations. You find that the developed nations with greater resources and negotiation power tend to prioritize their agendas, often sidelining the environmental justice concerns for the marginalized nations or communities. Also, another one that came out was that there is an issue of now the beneficiary gap, whereby the environmental justice for whose interest or for who. So now it's not clear who is benefiting for this. Also, that which came out clearly in our discussion was now limited access to negotiation space, whereby you find that the grassroots organizations have restricted participations, especially from the organization from the global south. Often they face logistical and financial barriers when it comes to attending these climate change summits. For example, the one that was in the current one, there's COP, was it 29 or that? So now you find that they have restricted participation in this, so now their own voice will not be heard. Also, we have fragmentation among the advocacy group, whereby they have diverging priorities. NGOs and other grassroots organizations might have different and sometimes conflicting priorities, which often lead to fragmented advocacy efforts, and this weaken their collective impact in their agenda setting. Also, we have another issue that came out for now, the power relations. You find that power relations among this group also leads to an issue when it comes now to agenda settings. Also, another thing was now we have limited access to negotiation spaces. Some NGOs, the national NGOs have greater access to this negotiation process, whereas the grassroots CBOs in charge with climate actions might have limited access on that case. Also, you have the NGOs now, some which are concentrating in urban setting, they have access to resources, whereas those concentrating in low rural areas or low-income areas might not have a space to access that. Also, we have technical and bureaucratic barriers, whereby the highly technical and bureaucratic nature of climate change negotiation make it difficult for grassroots organizations to navigate and influence the decision for this. We can have also insufficient expertise, whereby you find that the grassroots group may lack access to technical expertise and resources to effectively engage with scientific, economic, and legal dimensions of climate change agreements. Also, I think those are some of the points that we had. We had a lot, but due to time, I think those are some of the recurring or matching theme from our group. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Eric, for your contribution. Ms. Ann, welcome to continue from there.
Sorry, good people. Sorry, I just needed to take something. Thank you very much, Eric. Eric also was telling us, because I sat in that group, that he has worked in this area. And I like the responses that you're giving, and also because they are coming from you on this area. Remember, we've backgrounded and said that this is a question, and we were looking at the issue of agenda setting. Who sets the agenda for communication? Who sets the agenda for colleagues? When we talk about this question that we have had, and thank you very much for your shared responses. Initially, it was a bit technical and challenging for them, but now we are able even to find middle ground. When we talk about competing interests, when we talk about involvement of local leaders and explaining to them what we are doing, when we talk about knowledge gaps, okay, concerning do our governments and our policy makers and those who are in charge, are they able to look at what the real issues are, even as they sign global agreements, and come back and how do we usually say, how do we bring it down? How do we domesticate these agreements we have done abroad, other than just having open days and says we are going to plant trees? Also remember the issue of climate change, even in the African continent, has been there for a long time. When you think about our seasonal weather patterns, when you think about how our movements are from one community to another, the pastoralists, how do they go around? How do they forget? How do they integrate with their neighbors so that then they are able to know that we have reached this stage and we have reached another one? All of these responses that you're giving in terms of, and we've just had a debrief together to talk to each other about what the issues are in terms of agenda setting and setting the information. So we've taken these issues and we've talked to one another about what they are. We've talked about advocacy, global inequalities, which are the same issues also. If you're working across teams, especially research teams in different universities, the global north and the global south will never have the same. Even in terms of, we'll never have the same issues. Even sample populations, it's sometimes very difficult to come together and say, these samples look like this, these other ones look like that. So that's why we are saying when it comes to and we ask these questions where we are setting their agenda, we need to be able to achieve a goal. These NGOs or communities that are working down here, they need to be empowered. That is the empowerment we are talking about, where we say that he who pays the piper will call the tune. So if I am the one with the might and the funding, okay, and I'm telling these NGOs, which somebody has also responded and said that they're hurriedly put together because this is the new issue that is funding. In fact, some of the big funders now, I know that for one NGO that was working on in Nigeria on budget issues and calling accountability to action within government in terms of how they use budget, the funding is being cut because the money is now going to climate justice and things like that. So when now we have things like those that are changing, and then how then do we empower these NGOs who are taking up these issues to actually learn and to understand? And some we know are being put together. We're actually talking about the very things that we are saying. Then, is there research that is enough? Are we outputting enough research? Do we teach these researchers or these NGOs when they're on the ground to be able to know how best to collect the data that is required to go, as you have said, sign these agreements? And do we even understand who is the go-between, who will help us to understand these technical details that we are doing? I think this is where I think you've done a good job, and thank you very much, everyone, for just coming to feedback and to say that the passing of the message and the right message strategy to convey what we need is very important. Now we go back to, we've already then had our agenda setting, and we know what we want to and we want to say, and you're in front of that team. So even as we close this discussion, because the discussion we were saying is, how do we set the agenda? So even when the small NGOs are calling for press meetings or briefings, because they have to report to their donors that this is how we've been able even to do dissemination of the information. This is how we are speaking to the communities. How do they call the press? How do they discuss? And how do we also know now that they have? So our comms teams then have been able to secure a way in which we are going to disseminate information. We are going to speak about what we are doing. We're going to talk about our findings. How do we move from there? Okay, so let's move to the next slide. We look at our interview process because we were talking about how do we prepare for the interviews. We talk about the hard questions. We have the agenda. We say, this is what we want to say. We've given the perspective. So we are looking at ourselves at that point where you're probably the NGO lead for there. Okay, during the interview, we want to state the most important information first, and then we provide the background for these people. We want to keep our responses brief, but we want to keep them long enough to also help the reporter to get the quotes. If it is this issue then of challenges, what are the challenges we faced in implementing what we want to do in terms of ensuring that there is enough advocacy of user information in terms of climate justice, okay, or climate change. This is how we are working with the communities to ensure that we are finding a solution to this. When you talk about removing access to what? To a source of livelihood, okay? You are trying to change the people's views to, let's move from burning charcoal and its effects to this so that we can embrace clean and green energy. Okay, let us use briquettes. How have you removed them from that? What have you done to empower them? So now you want to present something like this. So you keep your responses about what the challenges are, how you've been managed to mitigate this, how you have come to this. We say when you're in the interview, we stick to the main points. Don't allow yourself to get drawn too far off to the tangents. So you're being asked a question and somebody's saying, but this person from the community has said that you didn't give them enough money to be able to do this. Focus on what you need to do. Focus on what your speaking point has drawn you here so that it's not long drawn out and you also don't get into a match where the community is saying this and he said this. We realize that many people make the mistake of talking too much. Repeat your points if necessary to be able to help you to get back on track. And then we say we mention the subject by name several times during the interview rather than saying it, climate change, it. You talk about what it is that you're doing. And then if you're doing the interview, whether it is even on radio, of course, we'll stick to the phone arguments. If it is on TV, we are making eye contact with the reporter and what they are saying. We state the most important information. Then you provide the background for that, how you came about. We keep our responses brief. We stick to our main points. Don't talk too much. Keep to the script, and then you know that you're talking to somebody, so you need to maintain eye contact with that person. Then next slide. We always say that don't overestimate a reporter's knowledge of your subject. Remember, now we've gotten a lot from all of you about this issue of climate change. Okay, now you're talking to me. That's why I wanted to hear from you. Don't estimate I know a lot about this subject. If your reporter bases questions on information they believe is incorrect, don't hesitate to set the record straight. Ann, I hear you on that question that you have said, but allow me to give you some insight into that. The issue is not ABC. The issue is EFG, okay? And then we offer the background information for what I am trying to change or to challenge so that then they change that issue that they have had is a stereotype or is something wrong to be able to correct them. Remember, we need to say, we said we have facts. Fact is fact. Science is based on facts. But if you're giving an opinion, even where you're debunking information, your opinions are yours. My thoughts as Ann are, but these are the facts on the ground. So you state the facts. Even when you're giving an opinion, it comes at the very end after you have presented your facts. And with research papers and things like that, sometimes there's hardly room to be able to give an opinion. It is probably only when you're doing a question and answer that you're responding to a reporter in an interview. When they ask a question that actually throws you off balance, you tell them these are the facts, but also in my opinion, this, and this. And then when you're in an interview, if you don't understand a question, ask for clarification rather than talking around. If you don't have the answer, it's okay to say so. tell the reporter where to find the information if possible, or tell them, I'll give you a contact. This is my colleague, or I'll give you a contact for the center that we have worked with and partnered with on this. Then you can ask them the questions for that. They say, if you feel unprepared to answer a certain question, tell the reporter you'll get back to him or her with an answer. We avoid disguising hypothetical situations, and then we never say no comment. If you cannot or you choose not to answer a question, explain briefly. Thank you for your question. That question is not in my area of expertise, or I do not feel comfortable to answer that, okay? I also haven't seen the research paper you're referring to with that question. So if you could allow me to get back to it, or to look it up, and then I can call you, or I can give you a response to that, and you make sure that you get back to them on. But no comment is not a good answer. I am not I am not strengthened enough, or I do not have sufficient information to give you a response to that is a better answer than saying, I have no comment to this. No comment looks, especially if you're coming out of somewhere and say, I have no comment, that is what will be replayed on and on, you know, and in this country where we like memes, we'll be able to pick it up. So that's why we are saying, stick to your facts. Don't get into areas where it's not your area of expertise, or you have not sufficient data to it. Instead, as we have said, you can actually say, let me get back to you. Or my view is, I do not have enough data to back that up, but my view is this, or based on current readings that I have done, or based on work I have done in this area, this is what I want to say. Next slide. Then we have in media, we have things that is called on the record, which is me and you saying something like this, but you also have off record. Off record is where the mics are switched off. We have finished the interview, and I say something to you, especially to a print journalist or somebody who's writing, and I tell you something or data that is not really in the public domain, but it shifts what you have been telling me in that. Or you want to give me a slight information that has not been released to the general public, but will be controversial, especially if it is something that is juicy, that is sweet, that can up the reporters background. They may not honor this. They say that they get annoyed with things that are said, or off the record. You can do it, especially if you have a sensible journalist that you have a relationship with. You can give them off the record, or you can give them what is called a scoop and tell them, if you've learned that they will honor that, it's important to say that. But to somebody who is a newbie in the field, who is very excited about a groundbreaking revelation, they'll run with it to print before you have presented your paper, before your faculty has accepted and everything, and then you find yourself in deep problems. So let's keep things on the record, and what we are allowed to say, what you're allowed to release, the information you're allowed to release. We also say, be honest. Don't try to conceal negative information. Let your interviewer know what you're doing to solve a problem. If I'm not sure I have an appropriate example to do this, but I can say, for example, like for instance, if you work for government, you work for county, we have maybe we have emissions that are coming out of somewhere. We do not know where they are coming from. Don't try and hide and say the community doesn't know, the people doesn't know. The problem with today is we have what is called citizen journalism. Everybody has this in front of them. They are posting, they are saying. So just by negating something that you have caught wind of as a practitioner or something like that, or a lab or an action that has gone wrong, or a disagreement within the way you're working with your partners, and media catches wind of it, don't try and hide it, okay? Face the facts and say, we realize that there's a problem, we are doing something to solve it. We are aware of this issue, we are in financial misappropriation. We are aware that we are doing this, we are checking with our finance teams, we are working with our internal teams to be able to resolve this problem, and in time we'll be able to give feedback to the donor, give feedback to that. So let's be honest. Let's learn to be honest in the way even with your donors, if there's a reporting, if there's malpractice that has been in terms of the way you do things, if there's money that has been lost or misappropriated, just say we are aware of that. Our teams, maybe we're able to do this, we didn't reach here, but then you also have a counter. Here's what we are able to account for. And that we know is a common issue in terms of that. You're given a grant, you had a budget, you're given a grant that was supposed to cover A, B, C, and D, but your money found legs and it found other projects to fund. Be honest in those areas. And then we say in an interview, we're talking about an interview process, don't joke, be friendly, but let's not be complacent or difficult, become a difficult interview subject. Assume everything you say, even in a social situation, especially if you're an authority or you're a face of what you say, may appear on print or in the air. Are you a director of your unit? Are you your vice chancellor? Are you what? It will come on, okay? I'll give a recent example. In Kenya, we had a high-ranking government official speaking about something to do with female issues, with what was happening within her area. And she said something that was really, I mean, even in terms of community, giving an answer like that in a public space, you know, you might say something nonchalant, you know, and it is picked up the wrong way. And of course, the feminist groups were against, and also just sometimes it does not sound like it is the right thing to have said. So we need to be careful, especially if we're speaking out in public and you see that there's a camera in front of you. If you're with your friends and in your home, you can laugh about it, but also be careful. Audio tapes are being leaked and recordings like that. People are being fired because of using WhatsApp on your office laptop and it is picked up and you're saying. So I think we need to be very careful. Just assume anything that you say these days may appear in print or on air meaning in television. So reporters can use silence to make you uncomfortable or talk or say things you may not want to say. It is best to stay quiet between questions, between when they finish one question and when they finish the other. Instead of that, like we're saying, talking too much, over avoiding things. Media training, by the way, to answer questions is an art. It's an art, and you can tell those who are comfortable or who have done this many times or who have had training, even media practitioners themselves. We go through training to be able to help us know how to do things, how to say things, when to say things. There's some institution where you have a basic line of defense and you're told this is how we answer this question. And that is how you're supposed to say that, you know, because that is the institutional way of doing things. I think it's good to stick to those ones. They are not the way, it's not the way we want you to answer the question, but it is the way your organization has trained you and prepared you to be able to give responses to that. And then don't fill in with chatter, what we call the nervous talk. And then when you're making your final comment, make it clear and concise. Re-emphasize your main point. We are here to actually launch this. We are glad to have, this is the culmination of 3 years of study. We are able to make a breakthrough in this study. We have committed, we've worked with these community groups. We've even uplifted them in this area, things like that, okay? And then in the end, if you feel that the reflex or even what the presenter is saying as their closing sentence, you can actually say, by the way, Anne, thank you for that. I know we have closed, but I think the real issue in that is, as you have said it, is actually this way. And rephrase them even when you're on air so that they can be able to pick up. Otherwise, you leave your presenter with the last line of defense, but he has said something that is contrary to what you were supposed to have spoken of. So in terms of the media interview, think about that also, and hear or say also what their issue is. So this is for the media. Now, when it comes to the general public, and we are discussing maybe you're in a report, so we are finished with the media. Next slide, when we are communicating with the public is, now you're in a conference, public is, you're in a school, you have discussions, okay? Now, your research paper has come out, okay? Your research paper, remember you've labored for this, okay? Or even you've done your PhD and it has been accepted, your thesis defense, and the school is now talking, we have a candidate who's been able to find this. So we don't, we tell you, don't go on vacation the week your research paper comes out, okay? Especially if you're in an institution that is known for this high end, even for your communication teams, okay? They need to be able to find you. My phone is off, I cannot respond, We need to do a press release. We need to talk to you. We cannot find Miriam. We cannot find Eric. We cannot find John. How are we going to communicate about it? The press wants to talk to you, who has been able to do that discovery, and not just your PR teams, because we need your thinking, we need your brain, we need what has gone into that work. Then we also say, don't just do a PowerPoint presentation of this. Tailor make your research topic in a manner that is interesting to the media. Begin with a story. When we began carrying out this research 3 years ago, at the first instant when we talked to the community, this is what we were able to find, this is what we were able to do. So tailor make your topic in a matter that is interesting. Remember, I always say we are finding a solution to the people who need it. Your work is interesting, but learn to talk to people who are not scientists. You do it all the time. You are at family dinners, you're with your dentist, you're in the airport. Reporters, they're just these people. They just need to know so that they can tell to an audience that is how different they are from your members of your family. So always learn to talk to the people who are non-scientists. So we also say an analogy or an image, even if it is flawed, it can really bring the point home. That's the story I'm telling you to think about. If your research is in genomes or these things like, what is it called? Like now this issue of the fruit flies, we dissected a fruit fly's head. What example can you give of that? Where do fruit flies hang around? You know, your kitchen, your fruits and things like that. What can you give me as an image or an analogy? What can you give to the doctor or the person who's finding out this research on cancer? What can you give them that is nearer to them so that they can be able to understand what you're talking about? You know, when you talk about a biomass that is in somebody's body and you're researching things like root causes of ulcer or causes of intrauterine fibroids in a woman, what can you give them as an example to be able to say, when you say the mass is the size of what, can you show them a mark? Can you tell them it's the size of a mango? It's the size of what is it called? Of an avocado, whatever. Give them an image so that it can help you to bring your point. And then a good picture will get your work a lot of attention. People like cool things to look at. If you have an example, even from the field, you could show an example of the first village. If you're doing archaeology, have those pictures on site. It's always nice for you to give your presentations this thing, so that it's not only your scientific terms and things like that. It's not only genes and things like that. How can you help them to be able to see what it is that you're talking about? Then I should have finished with this one for the press. My apologies. Let's go to the next one. If you ask the people that you're going to get back to them, remember we said you can tell them, I'm not familiar, I can get back to you. It is not unusual for a reporter to have to turn something into a story within a few hours. So if they ask and they call you and say, we hear you've had this groundbreaking discovery. Yes, we have. I'm able to give you an interview in a day or two once we've been able to discuss within the fact. So you can say that, and you can, don't leave them hanging, but give them a response. Then also remember, media is not your advertising farm. A good report will write a balanced story. You'll write a balanced story in terms of this is your discovery, but when you're doing the discovery or when you're finding out this has also, this other discovery debunked what you had said about what you are, or this other person said so and so. So don't be afraid when you have countering opinions, or when you have your opinion, but within the same context, then you have somebody who has dug up some information and found out what could have been a challenge to the study or to this discovery that you're going out. And then we say, be kind if a reporter makes a mistake. They've misquoted you or they've said something, get back to them, and you misquoted me. This is not what I said. Give them a time to be able to retell the story in the way that you could have told. I know there are some where libel and things like that are an issue, and somebody completely threw you off. So that is different, okay? Remember also the editor the guy might have written what you said. Even with some of us who record everything, it goes through a process. The sub-editor has written his own things or has removed the important parts that you left at the bottom and then has given you something that is not foolproof. the editorial process is labyrinth. That means that it has layers. It has layers. Even he's not the one who will give your topic a heading or a header. Like I prompted somebody for an interview, and what is it called? The headline that I read, I just put my head down and closed my eyes. But they are not in charge. The person who wrote the story, the editor is looking for something that will sell, or the sub is looking for the headline that will sell. So remember that some of these constructs are not within the person who wrote your story. Also, carry them in good faith. A good reporter wants to be accurate. And if they've messed up, they'll try to correct things or get them right the next time they report. If they throw a fit, I mean, if you throw a fit in terms of you wrote this wrong for me, they'll find someone else to put in the paper and you do not become a subject. If you're in a research institution and you know you're normally covered by the media, find ways of cutting them, find ways of training your people. If you're in science, find ways of getting the science reporters come together for an evening once every half year or every quarter. Explain what they're doing. Find out from them, what are your challenges in reporting? How can we help you become better of understanding? How do you understand these graphs of ours? Find a fun way to do that, play games, and then now you sit down for 1 hour and you tell them, guys, this is how these things read. These are the keywords. Play games with those keywords, genome sequencing, all of these things. Have them so that it is in them. It is in your interest for them to understand the work that you do. And that is why media rooms also have specialized science reporters so that they know the language of that. Invest in training them, invest in coming along with your work, take them to the field when you're doing your research projects so that then they can even have carried you along. And remember also your comms teams, they need to be part of your research budgets. They need to be part of your research budgets to be able to talk about what you're doing so that they can do a good job for you from the beginning to the end. Okay, so on that, now I'm going to also, let me see whether it is on our, just 1 minute. Okay. Okay, so when we think about our continent, so let me give you the link for this. Okay. I'd like us to give the answers. Let me just put it on the chat. No, sorry, it is the wrong one. Sorry, just 1 minute. I'm copying a link. Okay, so just give me your responses to that so that we can look at them together. Just click on the Woo Club and then put for me your answers in the link. I can see it. It's okay. We've gotten the feedback. We can see it. So we are looking at some of these sensitive topics, which have been there for a long time. So what are the controversial scientific issues arising? GMO products, we know that. Unsafe vaccine, just food systems, carbon credits, we've talked about that, natural resource use, COVID-19 vaccine efficacy, COVID-19 vaccines uptake, of course, the HPV vaccine for young people. Should we give it to the young girls? Should we not? In your own research fields is the peer issues, okay? And then I like this one, misinformation, disinformation on human and animal vaccines. And we'll discuss that. Politicization of science, politicians using their own, using pseudoscience to gain popularity and thereby misleading the public. All of these are critical issues, and some, it's true. These are some of the things that we are seeing are, what is it called? Are controversial issues. There are controversial issues around that. So when you're handling these sensitive topics, and we know Africa is a place where if you're misquoted, even just getting yourself out of this thing is a problem. Let's take the next slide. These are all sensitive, controversial. How do you prepare yourself for these things, especially if you're within that space where you're communicating? You have to prepare. You have to prepare. You cannot be over-prepared. Anticipate potential questions and practice your delivery of this issue or others to ensure confidence. Also remember, media is always looking, and I think they do this a lot with politicians. They have come to open, maybe you've invited the Minister for Science, the Minister for Energy, if you're in a team like that, the Minister for Health, to come to the launch of a vaccine or a groundbreaking initiative that you've done. But they want to ask politicized questions, political questions. So your entire launch is taken over by the one question that they ask that politician. Or your facility or your event is used to pick or to throw jabs at somebody else. And we have this a lot within the continent. You need to be able, even on the side, to talk to their media teams and to tell them, guys, we know we've heard from the key players, the policy makers, but kindly keep your story to XYZ. Let's keep it to the reporting. Report what you're doing, but give us the factual report and outcome of what we were discussing at this meeting. Even as a practitioner, you need to anticipate these questions and practice your delivery to ensure that you're confident as you're speaking about this, even as you're countering that information and disinformation that was done. Disinformation, misinformation is going to be your biggest thing. It's going to be your biggest thing. And I don't have it in the in this question. I think I'll have it at the end. We're going to discuss a bit in the interview. State what your boundaries are in terms of what you're prepared to discuss and what information is confidential. This is when you're handling sensitive topics. Maintain your composure. You might be thrown off, especially if it's a live interview and you're three people. Yourself, the practitioner in that area that you're trying to defend, a human rights practitioner who is there on the side, and somebody else. Maintain your composure. They might counter you, especially science and issues where you know that you're an expert in and you're fighting about, and then you find the community mobilizers, or you find the human rights activists. Please remember also these are also areas where you need to be able to prepare yourself. Prepare yourself, arm yourself with your facts, maintain your composure. You're thrown for a question that you are not ready for, maintain composure. And then we say you use neutral language that is clear, objective, avoid over-sensationalizing a topic. Redirect the question to one you're comfortable answering. No one is killing you. You will not look like the fool because you've told them, thank you for your question. However, allow me to respond to this question in this answer. Remember, we won't, no comment. We'll tell them, let me answer this question. The way you've asked that question, let me redirect it and answer it in this way. You have to learn how to answer your nuances, how to do that, how to handle that. And then you acknowledge complex topics and offer more nuanced perspective, something that is easier for your interviewer or the community or the person you're speaking to understand. Okay, now, this is now our next question, and we won't discuss for too long because we actually have only 10 minutes. I just want to hear from a few of you. Okay, in your field, let's take the next slide. We are almost at the very end. We have what we call the expert commentator. And here, I just want to pick your views. In your field, who do you think are the expert commentators on certain topics in your field of science? Okay, so we have some CEOs who have had to front themselves. Many people don't like being in front of the media. I'm also not a very public person. I will talk to you, I will deal with the media, we will answer the questions, we will prepare everything. But to present myself like you know, and I struggle with that. And yet I'm in the field, I'm pushing people to do that. But there are people we have seen who you feel, you can write it in the chat, who you feel that this I feel is an expert on this. Like here in Kenya, I'll say Dr. Gitahi, who's one of the AMREF directors, and he also works or sits on the board of a couple of things. They are able to speak on issues and things very easily. It's in a field of science, it's in a field of medicine. Who do you see as some of your expert commentators on some of the fields in which you're working? Who are your influencers? I'm not talking about the paid for people who know one or two topics, but within your field, can you share some of the people who you feel are, you know, are able to speak about this topic from your side? We have one, thank you, Dr. Joyce Wangare in psychology. Anyone else? I'm waiting for those so that we can also see and to be able even to follow them and to follow them. Let me see. Agriculture, Wandile Shilobo in South Africa. We have Professor Mohamed Janabi, Dr. Sabrina Kitaka for pediatrics and adolescent health. What we are looking for is also, if they are media practitioners, these are the names that we need to be following so that we can be able to see what they're saying. Science journalism, Joseph Mbeng Boom, good for that. This is also to help you to look at some of these names and to see who we are speaking to. So remember we said some of the media trends or the PR trends we are running on to this year. Dr. Aya Ama, she's a benthic ecologist. I've never had that word. And so this is one of the people I'm going to look up in terms of what she does, because I'm not familiar with that profession. Yes, in nephrology, yes, at least that one, I think it has to do with the, exactly, Davis Mkonji, who's the Deputy Director Communication, Kemri, you've seen I quoted him here because of something he's done. What we are saying is these are some of the people that we are fronting because they have the subject knowledge and they also have the specialization in talking about it, but also they know the nuances in terms of what to do and what not to do. Dr. Elliot Matthew for geological sciences, because sometimes we are looking even within ourselves as communicators, as public, communication managers, who can we get to partner with in this subject? Who can we talk to? I have a conference, I need 4 practitioners. I know 2, where can I get the other 2? So thank you for this. And for those of you who are also looking, these are some of the people that you need to be following in terms of their work. You need to be looking up in terms of their work. Dr. Mercy Korir, yes, she's a medical journalist. She did a lot of work for us as well when I used to work with the institution I used to. These are people, you see, that's why I was saying, you can be within your profession, but you can also become the person media runs to be able to help them, even to issue explainers. These explainers that you see media saying, let me give you an explainer. Someone must have broken it down to them. We don't know everything. So we are looking for people who will help us. So we'll follow some of these names and we are happy to even see whether we can come on board and to ensure that they are part of the network at TCC. So for this, we say, where are your interview opportunities? Even if you're that practitioner, the last slide, where are these interview opportunities that you have? You have your expert commentators. You can be the expert commentator yourself. Our last slide, what do you need to do? Where do you look for your opportunities? So post-conference, you've done your presentation at a conference, and you know these conferences are limited to specific journalists and those with knowledge. You don't invite everybody for medical conference or scientific breakthrough conferences or NASA-based conferences. You know, you'll only limit them to the people with knowledge for that. It is not like NMAS where we have the president talking on a national day, everybody's invited, the media house. You'll have very few. So those who you get there in the media, guys, when you have requests for media, after you've done your presentation of the groundbreaking discoveries, speak to them where you can. Check in with your managers, check in with your comms teams. I have this interview. Sometimes you don't need to do that check-in, depending on whether you are the head itself or you're the one in charge. Also, when you do things like this and you release your scientists to go and attend, you signed them off to attend these papers, tell them in case you need and you have opportunities for us to speak to media, please go. Give it a shot. I am so-and-so. I'm a microbiologist from the University of this. I'm a marine scientist. I represent. Always speak, also highlight your organization as you highlight yourself, because it's good visibility for where you work for. Answer the request from media. If you have arranged PR interviews from your institution management, take up these media opportunities. Remember, in PR, we say this is the year where you front yourself. You front yourself, of course, within certain limits and within likely needs to be able to speak about that. Live news shows following a major news announcement. So you have the press conference, but the media will call you on the side. Please explain to us a little bit more on that so that they can also get a good sound bite or something, especially if you're somebody who's very good and knowledgeable with the media. They want to hear something else. Or then they invite you to the studio to do that. Or you're asked to do a profile interview with a national newspaper or your work. This can be a feature, and features can take the point where they can also ask you personal questions about who you are, what you love doing, what sport do you play. Then we talk about your discovery. Why did you love doing what you are? How did you become a marine scientist, okay? Why do you like research in HIV/AIDS? What was it? You know, people come up with those things and say, when I watched my sister die, I decided that I'm going to become a doctor. You know, in our village, we had children die of contaminated water, and I decided that I'll become a water engineer. You know, I'm going to do research in this area. All of those, these are opportunities that we require you, or we ask that you be free enough to uptake. We've given you a few points today on how to be able to do that. Tomorrow we'll have more practical ideas, or rather sessions, to be able to see how we can then get the meat and the feel of what we are asking. So I will end there. I will invite questions for any of us. And if there's anything you feel that needs to be, we need to take a little bit of time to include one or two things in the training tomorrow that you feel needs to be handled and has not been handled, we'll see whether we can find a way of incorporating that. But thank you to everybody, and to just ask if there are any questions, or as Nicole has aptly said, if there's any feedback that you can give for today before we get into the second day of training tomorrow. Any feedback before I hand it over back to Nicole? And thank you very much for being an engaging audience. Thank you for your feedback, for your comments. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, Nicole, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
So thank you everyone for joining today's session. Thank you, Anne, for the wonderful presentation. I hope you've all grasped good enough content based on what you've learned today and from the discussions that you've had also with your fellow colleagues in the break rooms. So just note the session has been recorded. So once they're published, you will all receive the recordings of day one. And then tomorrow we'll be back here again, same time in the morning, to go through the day's topics and presentations from Anne, and we'll continue from there. And do note that for the certificates that they'll be issued for those who attend both days, strictly both days. So I hope you all taken note of that. And with that, I wish you all a lovely afternoon. See you all tomorrow.
Thank you.